Good evening, friends, and shalom and blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Welcome to this episode of Un-Apologetics, our quote unquote Sabbath night open mic. I say that because it was supposed to be yesterday, or the night of the Sabbath, and not tonight. Some of you guys are confused about that. It's because the Sabbath actually starts on the sundown of the previous day, so Friday night. But anyways, appreciate all you guys who are here. Thank you very much for being here. Again, this is going to be a after show open mic for a debate I just had over on Standing for Truth's channel, talking about whether or not the modern translations are evil, are wicked, are mistranslations, are dangerous, are untrustworthy. Those two last words being the ones that we actually used in the debate. If anybody has any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, anything like that, or you just want to weigh in, definitely would appreciate y'all joining. I see Doki Doki is in the live chat. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate that you enjoyed that, my friend. Already am joined by at least one person, so shalom none biz. Thank you very much for being here, and how's it going? Did you see the debate? What'd you think?
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for doing this little after show thing. Yeah, I saw it. I don't want to say I don't have any skin in the game, but it's funny that your KJV, your NKJV, gosh, I can't even give all the initials. You have to know what I'm talking about. All those Bibles have one thing in common. They all have a V on the cover for version. It's not like the King James translation, the New King James translate. These are versions, so that tells us right away. They're, if you want the translation, go to the original document. This is our version, is what they're telling you.
Well, and I can kind of see what you mean by there. I do think, to an extent, it is honest to put version, even if you're just doing a straight translation, just because there's going to be translational differences from version to version. One group of people thinks a word means something, and one group of people thinks a word means something else.
Or they have an agenda. Or they have an agenda.
Yeah, that one happens a lot too. Actually, in fact, as an extension of Olive Branch to my KJV only as friends, one of the things I do appreciate about the KJV is, for the most part, it does appear to be agenda-less, but I do have to stress for the most part, because there are certain elements where King James did force the translator's hands. For example, he wanted them to use words like church rather than congregation whenever they found the word ecclesia, because the church is a structured governmental body, whereas the congregation is the members of the church, right?
They added. Oh, yeah, I know what. Yeah, every time I talk, it sounds like you're flushing a toilet. I now know what Donnie was talking about when he wanted you to mute your mic or something after you got done talking. Can you hear that? Can you backtrack and hear yourself? Like when you get done talking, it sounds like it sounds like a toilet flushing. It's really weird.
Yeah, Donnie has actually told me about that before, so I'll try to make sure I'm muted whenever I'm not talking.
Well,
but
why would it do that to you and not us? Or
it's because of my laptop mic, which is the mic that I'm using. But yeah, that's the main reason why. So, did you have any just to see if we can get the conversation kind of rolling here a little bit?
yeah,
Did you by chance have any?
yeah, your Zechariah 9:9. Let's look at all the version, all the V. Let's look at all the versions and see how it's been corrupted to look like because you good Christians believe in a single triumphal entry of Jesus. You have to accommodate the Zechariah 9:9 prophecy to fit that, rather than looking at the original. Well, I don't want to say the original. You can look at the original Hebrew, the interlinear, and you'll see that it's actually two different donkeys. So yeah, let's look at the KJV says, and in Zechariah 9:9 it says he will be riding a donkey and a colt. Okay, so that's kind of good. Your New King James takes out the and just puts a comma, making it look like this donkey, this adult male donkey he's going to be riding is going to be a colt. And then they describe what a colt is for us. Thank you very much. The foal of a donkey. But it's genius in the Hebrew interlinear there's 4 different donkeys mentioned. Well, there's 4 different donkeys because they simply say he will be riding a donkey. That donkey is, per the Hebrew, is an adult male donkey. And then it continues, and a colt, and that's a yearling male foal. And then it just continues, the foal of, and a foal is simply just an offspring, whether it's male or female of a donkey. But if it's a male, it's going to be a colt. I think a female is a Jenny or a Henny or something. But anyway, the final one is he will be riding a donkey and a colt, the foal of, and the Hebrew, if you read it in any version, it says the colt of a donkey, but the Hebrew is plural. It's really weird. He will be riding a donkey and a colt, the foal of female donkeys, plural. It's really weird. But yeah, just a quick reference, looking up your KJV, Zechariah 9:9, and you'll see and donkey and a colt, and then you can put a side-by-side comparison with really any other version and see how they've changed it to make it look like one donkey.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and go through that right now, but we do have a new person joining us, Bible Research Tools, excuse me. Shalom, thank you very much for being here. Did you watch the debate? Did you have any comments on it, or any comments on the topic at large?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What's the racket? I heard an echo.
Welcome, friend. It only works for him. I don't know why, but when he gets done talking and we start to talk, there's like a flushing sound or a fluttering sound, and that might. Yeah, go ahead and continue. We can hear you. We can read you 5 by 5. Go ahead and continue, friend.
Yes, I watched the debate. It was an excellent debate. I believe I've heard both of you before. I don't recall if it was the same time or not, but that was an excellent debate. I liked it. I'm sort of like you, CJ. I think whatever Bible version you happen to have is probably a good one. But I use mostly the King James because that's the only Bible I had when I started reading it. But I did find some real problems when I was studying it. Some things didn't make sense, like end of the world. You know, throughout the Scripture, Old and New Testament, it says the world will be around forever. So that just did not seem right.
And if you're meek, you're supposed to inherit it.
Yeah.
So do you want to be
Psalm
meek?
says the same thing. There won't be much to inherit if it's destroyed. But I also noticed a problem with grammar, and also with a translation, a very serious translation in 2 Thessalonians 2. Let me bring that up and explain a little better.
Is the version
in verse 2, it says, well, this is the King James, but it says that ye be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. I said, wait a minute, Paul's been telling these people they're going to be raptured really soon. That's what I got out of it. Well, anyway, I got to do a lot of research on that, and I found that that may not be the right translation, that it may be, for example, let's look at some of these others. The NASB says, what wrong verse? Hold on. I can bring up all my translations at once. By the way, I have a button that opens Bible Gateway to all the English translations for whatever verse I happen to be on. And I heard you mention something about Bible Hub. I go to there a lot too. But the NASB,
I've heard
the day of the Lord has come, right? That's what they say. The King James says the day of the Lord is at hand. I believe the NASB got it right, because why would the Thessalonians be disturbed if the day of the Lord is at hand? That's what they've been looking for all along. The only thing that would disturb them if they missed the rapture or whatever. So
Well, when
That
I'm in,
was that really bothered me for a long time till I read about a book by James Stewart Russell called The Parousia, and he makes a big deal out of that. He quotes during his day, which was the 1800s, he quotes several authors who uh, quote it like the NASB, the day of the Lord is at hand or is present, and others who follow the King James translation. So they split, but I just don't see how it makes any common sense whatsoever, the King James Version. So that one bothered me for a long time. And I was really strictly King James up until I was, oh gosh, in my 50s. So about 30 years I was strictly King James, but that's when I started straying away and reading other translations. Another one that bothered me a lot was Deuteronomy 32:8. The King James Version did not match the LXX at all. And I did have the
they
old
corrupted
Greek
themselves. Is that
translation.
what you're saying? They corrupted themselves. What did they corrupt? Is that the verse you're talking about?
Well, I
32:8.
can't really say it's corrupted. I just think they.
No, the verse actually says they have the verse actually says they have corrupted themselves. But a lot of people don't know how to translate that. They have corrupted
Oh, no,
something.
not that verse.
Okay, go
No,
ahead.
it's verse 32:8. Actually, it starts with 7. It says, now, remember, they're going to remember the days of old, okay? Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will tell thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee. When the Most High divided the nations, well, that sounds like Babel to me. Their to the nations their inheritance. When he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel.
Yeah, 70 came down to Egypt. There were 70 at Babel. 70 came down to Egypt, coincidentally, or as they point out, intentionally. Go ahead.
Well, now if you look at the LXX, it says according to the number of the angels of God.
I think angels of God, and I think Chuck Missler points out angels of God is always referred to man. Is that right? No, I did that wrong. No, you might have a good point there. That CJ, where you at on this? I think that's a good example.
Well, before I give where I'm at, Nick Saris has been waiting very patiently, so I do want to go ahead and give him the chance to speak. We've actually debated before, so that'll be
yeah. Nick, I saw you debate one night.
Welcome, Nick.
So hold that thought for a moment. Nick, thank you for being here. What'd you think of the debate? I'm pretty sure I saw you there actually, but nonetheless, go ahead and give out your thoughts. I appreciate you being here.
Nonetheless.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. So yeah, I enjoyed the debate. I think obviously I disagree with some of the things that were said. I believe that the King James is without translational error, and I also believe that the places that were mentioned where there are errors are easily refuted.
You never went over Matthew 1:16. Matthew 1:16. You don't get 14 generations.
Hang on just a sec, brother. I want to give him some time since we're just starting it off. I just want to give everybody some time to.
Oh, I didn't want him to go through a whole laundry list before I hit that up. Okay, yeah, my apologies. You're right. Go ahead.
No, you're good.
It's actually fine. I don't mind if people just want to fire some questions at me. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, I did feel there was a couple of things that I would disagree with the guy who was defending the King James Version. Not major things. It's like with Will Kenny, we differ on a few tiny little bits of detail, like he talks about a little bit of numerology and things like that in the Bible, and that sort of backs up the validity of the King James, where I don't sort of see that. But apart from that, I am in agreement with what was said by the King James version defender.
And I appreciate that. And lastly, we have Math Pig, who's joined us. I think this is actually the first time you've ever been here. Thank you for being here. Go ahead and give any thoughts you may have on the. I know you're probably not one who has a dog in this particular fight, being agnostic, but nonetheless, any thoughts you'd like to give on what we've said so far, and then we'll end the conversation.
As I mentioned in the live chat, man, I haven't really. I didn't actually see the debate. I was doing something different, but I just seen who was live, wanted to have a chat, come over. As you say, I've never been here before. I seen an opportunity where our times matched. Because of our worldwide difference, we generally don't. So I thought I would just come on, listen for a wee bit, see what you just have a talk about, and I'd maybe throw a point in every now and again. But you know, thank you for having me.
Where are you from that you got that cool accent? Where are you from? You got that cool accent.
I'm from Northern Ireland.
Very nice, very nice.
Thank you.
From where?
Northern Ireland.
Northern
Ireland.
Fake Ireland, as my friends from the real South call it.
Yeah, the wonders of technology. We have in this room, with only 5 people, we have 3 countries, all thousands of miles away from each other. So that's pretty cool.
And 7 different books from each of us.
Living proof in the live chat called it. They said Irish. They're close. Fake Irish. Yeah.
So, first thing I want to jump in here, since None of Your Biz has already talked about it, is this Zechariah 9:9 that we have up. So I want to go through. We'll go through probably 3 or 4 modern versions and then KJV and just see where they vary here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your claim here was that the modern versions make it seem like this is only a single donkey, which therefore would make it confusing that Jesus came in on 2 donkeys in the New Testament. Is that correct?
Amen.
All right, so let's go ahead and go through it. So we'll start with the NIV. I don't really like the NIV, but it is the most popular English Bible, so we'll start with it. Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. All right, so that's pretty much what you said it would be. We'll just go down the line. New Living Translation. Rejoice, O people of Zion. Shout in triumph, O people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and victorious, yet he is humble, riding on a donkey, riding on a donkey's colt. So that almost sounds like it's clarifying what the donkey is. So that's even more specifically what you said there. So far, so good on your part. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud. Da, 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 da. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. All right, let's see what the KJV has to say. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. That is a interesting insertion there, because it does make it read differently. Certainly. Now, I don't know if it was intended differently. I guess I'd have to study that a little bit more. But I can certainly see what you're talking about here as far as in fact, we'll just compare it to the New King James that's under it. Lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey, certainly sounds different than riding upon an ass and upon the foal of an ass. It seems like the King James is talking about 2 and the New King James is talking about 1, and these other versions seem to be talking about 1 also. So I was actually not aware of this particular example. I'd be interested to see what the underlying Hebrew has to say, but does anybody have any comment on that so far? Because that is an interesting find. That certainly creates a difference between modern translations and King James Version.
By the way,
Sorry.
the RS. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'd just make a quick suggestion that many times when you see and in the King James, it basically can be the equivalent of even or also, and so it's just a basic conjunction. So sometimes it might say the great God and our Savior Jesus Christ, for example, where if we were to put that in strictly modern terms, we would say the great God, even our Savior Jesus Christ. And so many times when we see and, we look at two different objects. And so, but in the King James, and can mean even and can be equivalent to even or also.
I'd like to push back on that and have you and challenge you to find me one. I don't want to say it angrily, like, oh, find me one verse. Okay, but no, quite simply, man to man, just quickly find me or take a few minutes or something, but find me a verse where and means the exact same thing as the words before and after it.
Well, I think I can think of it, and I do appreciate the example given there. I'll pass it to Nick very quickly here, but that's kind of why I said I wanted to look into this, because it's always a question of is what it reads like to us moderns what was intended by the KJV translators. And Mr. Sayers is a KJV onlyist, but it sounds like here he might say probably not. And I can think of an example that's kind of like that, in the sense of Thomas calling John my Lord and my God, but he's referring to the same individual. In the case of obviously Jesus. But it'd be interesting. I would want to look into this more. Go ahead, Nick, and answer yourself. Obviously, he was asking you a question, not me.
So if we look at, say, Titus 2:13, so this is known. People will talk about the Granville Sharp rule and say that this is talking about, Jesus. He is the great God and he is our Savior, Jesus Christ. And so in the King James, it says the glorious appearing of the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. So some people make much ado about this and say, oh, it's talking about two different people, the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. But and they go to the Granville Sharp rule, trying to sort of prove that the King James has an error here. But if you understand that the conjunction and around the time of 1611 could mean even as well, it had that type of weight to it. So reading the King James where it says, and the glorious appearing of the great God, even our Savior, Jesus Christ, it doesn't separate who they are. It makes God and the Savior equal. And so, so that's the example that I was talking about.
I understand that example. Thank you for that. I will put the burden on me to actually look into this a little bit more, but I simply, for that example you gave, I would say that I disagree. From a Hebrew roots perspective, we saw Jesus coming, speaking only the words of the Father. So I can understand why you would think he is the Father, but it's fine. We can move on from there. And the burden is on me to show where and does not mean even. So it's fine. We can let it go, brother. I appreciate your answer. Good answer, by the way.
Can I interject, Mike? Check out First Peter, the Greek, in 2 Peter 1:1 and 2 Peter 1:11. You got to look at them simultaneously.
Yeah, I look at Psalm 110 and I see Yahovah at the right hand of Yahovah, and I understand why you guys would be intent on trying to convince me of a different theory than what I see. I'm trying to be so respectful.
I'm just saying, look at the Greek and from Peter in 2 Peter 1:1 and 2 Peter 1:11. It's pretty straightforward, the Greek. Now, the King James, I would personally think they mistranslated, although not intentional. But the Greek reads, our God, on verse 1 says, our God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Okay? The verse 11 reads, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. It's the exact same Greek except for the first word, which in one case it's God and the other case it's Lord.
Now, here's one of the interesting things that I think we have here is, so Mike, you would be a Unitarian, right? And so the people that Nick was talking about when he said some make much ado about this, ironically, I think would actually be you.
Yeah.
But that sort of just means that both the passages come into dispute, right? And I think in order to demonstrate it, we'd have to go into a conversation about deity of Christ and all that kind of stuff. which who knows, that may end up coming up again anyways. But at any rate, I do think for the majority of Christians who do believe in the divinity of Christ, and I do want to make a brief correction. Nick, you are a Trinitarian, yes? Okay. So just a brief correction for you, Mike. A Trinitarian does not believe that Jesus is the Father, but they do believe they're both God. There's two different kinds of people who believe that Jesus is Jehovah. Technically three if you count semi-Arians, but there's almost none of them anymore. But there's modalists and Trinitarians. So modalists do believe that Jesus is the Father, and that's like your oneness Pentecostals. But a Trinitarian believes that the Father and the Son are actually separate persons. So I just want to briefly clarify that there. At any rate, though, we have so I have the Hebrew here, right? Now it does look like the "and" is there in the Hebrew, the ve'al. So it says lowly and riding on a donkey and a colt, the foal.
No, that last, you go over that last part. Don't forget that last part. It's really weird. It's plural. The foal of donkeys. I don't know if you can see right below each red word is like noun, masculine, plural, stuff like that. But yeah, that last one's really odd. Like, how could he be the foal of like a bunch of female donkeys? Is he like a stud donkey, or did his mother die and he's with the women, or is that just a Hebrew thing that you talk about any foal of a donkey, you're gonna say you're gonna put plural in there? But no, let's not forget that part. Go ahead and carry on. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so I can partially answer that, and I do want everybody to always understand when I talk about the Hebrew here, I am legitimately learning Hebrew in a way to where like I can read it and stuff like that. But I am still a student. If I was getting like a college course or something like that, I'd probably be a sophomore. So I do want to be clear on that when I say this, or any other commentary in the future. To be fair, that said, my understanding is that especially feminine plurals like the tav at the end can very often be found in places that are not necessarily plural, and actually the im is found there a lot of times too. So like as an example, hashemayim, that's the I am in particular, but that's the sky or the heaven. But shamayim is also heavens or skies, right? So the I am there is a plural, but it can refer to both the sky singular or the heavens plural. Or you can have another example is mayim, which is water. That can be, obviously the same word for plural and for singular because it's got that I am ending again. And usually this has something to do with like the way that they're looking at these things. Water is kind of plural by nature in a weird way. You actually should listen to some of the rabbis talk about it because they can go super out there, and it's like watching science fiction and stuff. But at any rate, if you have a cup of water and you pour it into 2 cups of water, then you have the same water and it's now 2 waters, and you can just mix it together again and make the one water, right? And so it's sort of like they're implying a sense of quote unquote plurality to certain words. In the case of offspring, I could see that, and I'll have to ask a teacher, but I could see that as being in reference to the fact that there is 2 parents. Sort of implying that level. I want to see where, or what the other texts like that, that would be referencing a donkey, a foal, would say. But that's kind of like my inkling right off the bat. Or like memluchot is another example. Actually, that actually uses the tav ending with the feminine tav, right?
Or Shavuot for the festival, but also Shavuot for Daniel 7s, right?
Yeah, well, and Shavuot for a week, right? And that is a perfect example as well. In both of those instances, right? Memluchot is the empire, so it's one nation, but it's made up of a bunch of conquered nations, right? And then Shavuot, it's 1 week, but it's made up of the 7 individual yoms or days, right? So those are both perfect examples there. let's go ahead, and because that looks like that kind of just ended there. I think that in this example, the "and" here could certainly be in reference to the fact that there's supposed to be two donkeys. So I guess now I'm unfamiliar. Is there two donkeys in the Jesus coming through story?
Matthew says Matthew has two donkeys. Mark and Luke have one specific wild donkey, and John just says a donkey that he found. In the Greek, it's a male adult donkey in John.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't read the Gospels in probably about a year now, unfortunately, because I've been studying a lot of the Hebrew, and obviously that means not the New Testament, right? But the thing about the Bible is there's so much in it that you end up kind of forgetting a lot if you're not reading every single book every single day. You know what I mean? But let's see here. When they drew near Jerusalem and came to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus said to his disciples, "Go into the village opposite you, find a donkey tied and a colt with her." Yeah, it does. So that is interesting. Zechariah does certainly seem to be referencing the two on purpose. And the KJV does actually keep that, whereas I guess a lot of these modern versions would not. That is an interesting example I've never heard before. And I might have to look deeper into that. Does anyone else have any comments on that? Doesn't sound like it. So
if you wanted to move on, my second question was Matthew 1:16, where you're not going to get 14 generations. But no, carry on wherever you were. I just wanted to throw that out there.
So Matthew 1:16, the 14 generations. I guess I'm not sure how that would be a KJV only question, would be my only thing. Perhaps you could make it one.
Oh yeah, actually, that's good. I have not checked out the other versions. I'm sure they all have the same. But yeah, when it says the last one is and Joseph, the husband of Mary, in the that only will give us 13 generations, where the text specifically says it's got to be 14, 14, 14. But yeah, you're absolutely right, CJ. That is probably in every Bible, not just a KJV question.
Well, and so since we do have not just a KJV onlyist, but a noted debater in the room here, Mr. Sayers, if you would like, do you prefer a Mr. Sayers or a Brother Nick, or what do you prefer?
Yeah, sorry, I just had to unmute myself there. You can call me anything, but yeah, Mr. Sayers, that's fine.
So since you did watch the debate and have debated me before and are a KJV onlyist, what are some of the problematic arguments you thought I used, or on the flip side, maybe the arguments he used that I didn't properly address? And we can just kind of start a conversation that way.
Cool. So maybe I'll just quickly answer this Matthew chapter 1, verse 18 issue. And it's quite simple. If you look at verse 17, it says, all the generations, where are we? King James here. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. So notice it says David there. And then it says, and then from David until the carrying away to Babylon are 14 generations. So it mentions David 2 times there. And so that's counted. So it goes from Abraham to David. Then it counts David again. David until the carrying away into Babylon. And then it counts from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ. And so that's got to be taken into consideration, that it's not just a list and we go, okay, there should be this many in it. I think it's is it 42? We've got to understand that there are some people who are doubled up in that. So if you read verse 17, that answers that question in the genealogy. Back to the debate, I would disagree with what you said about King James being bisexual. Absolutely not. He actually wrote a book against sodomy. And so for him to write a book against sodomy and then to be openly practicing sodomy, this would have been one of the biggest scandals of that entire era. The royal family, they were already under a lot of scrutiny because they had separated from the Roman Catholic Church. Any type of behavior like that would have been well known throughout all of Europe. And there was no one who actually accused King James of that type of behavior until long after he was dead. Then one of his enemies made this suggestion. Most people who talk about that today and write books about that, they'll say things like, David and Jonathan were homosexual, Jesus was a homosexual, Erasmus was a homosexual. It's just read into history. If you read the material of King James, most books say that he was a homosexual or he was bisexual. But when you look at the actual facts and stats and figures on that, oftentimes, if you were to read the biography of, say, Henry VIII, where he calls people his favorites, where he would be around men and acting in a certain way, if you actually just cross out the name Henry VIII, put King James there, you can read into it, oh, he's homosexual. It's just because people already have this mindset. They're just trying to read that into the story, into the narrative. But there's really nothing. There's absolutely nothing that can pin King James being a homosexual, except that he called people his favorites, just as Henry VIII did. And he had his favorites. And these were kings. They had men around them all the time. It's a totally different culture. And so, yes, I would disagree with that. I would disagree with Easter. I believe Easter is a perfectly good translation. Cherubim. So all those issues that were raised, I would disagree with that. On the flip side, I don't think that quote was from Metzger. I would know about that quote if it was really from Metzger. He is heretical. He pretty much believes just like Bart Ehrman believes, in a sense, except he doesn't come out and say I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic or whatever. But he had a very poor bibliology. So I would disagree with what was stated about him. And also, I don't think Gail Ripplinger is the best example to bring forth for really any debate. But apart from that, I agree with everything else.
So I do have that obviously brings up a couple different points we could question. One thing that I am curious of, because I'm certainly open to being corrected if indeed this is wrong. But from what I've been able to gather, it does seem like, at least amongst a certain crowd of people, it was generally accepted that King James did have bisexual tendencies. And I do want to be clear, bi, not homosexual. Just to be clear on that, because I know he did father children, he did have wives and stuff like that. I do grant that a lot of people have read stuff into the past, like the Jonathan David example is a great example. There's clearly no evidence whatsoever that they were, romantically involved. And I think really there is something to be said about our culture's perversity in assuming any incredibly deep male-to-male relationship had to be romantic, when in reality, two men can just be really good friends. I've heard people say, for example, that Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer are homoerotic, when in reality, that's just a perverse culture looking back on two really good friends in literature, right? So I grant that, certainly. But a lot of the quotations that I'm aware of are pretty damning things, and they even come from around or near his time. I did drop one of the ones from Thomas Howard in the live chat, where it talks about him, pinching his cheeks and smoothing his ruffled garment and all this kind of stuff. Seemingly implying that there is relationship between the two. Another example that's also from the time that people often quote, I guess I'm not sure if he's immediately after or if he's actually a contemporary, but would be Esme Stewart. which I guess now I want to double check to make sure, see when exactly he did live. So let's go ahead and clarify that real quick. Would have died in 1583, so is a contemporary. And let's see, I actually have the quote here. Says, well, so hang on, I want to dig through this because this is somebody's article, but I want to get the quote out of the article. So let me get that here real quick. But nonetheless, it is a second source. I'm not going to have you take my word for it. I'll actually read it once I find it here. But nonetheless, and then there's of course the quote, which I do think comes after he was born, or after he was, after he had died, but that King Elizabeth had been surpassed by Queen James. I do believe that's a little bit after his time, but nonetheless, that's the idea is still being spread there again, right? It seems to me like it was kept secret from the populace, but this seems to be a relatively well-known thing, and it was kind of common for the time, right? Like if you go to like, for example, Florence, right? Florence, excuse me. A lot of the people who we see there, who we associate with, being great minds of the time, like Michelangelo and Donatello and stuff like that, they certainly were, doing some not so savory stuff on the side. In other words, Europe kind of had some pretty flagrant homosexuality in the 15 and 1600s, 1400s as well. And a lot of times that flagrantness was within certain circles. In other words, the populace doesn't really know what you're up to, but the people who are in the know definitely are in the know. You know what I mean? So yeah, it seems to me like a little bit, I don't know, bizarre that people reject that argument so strongly. Because I don't know, I've always thought it was pretty good evidence. But nonetheless, go ahead and comment on what I've said so far.
Yeah, so I think it's just one of those things that continually gets said, and there are a lot of anecdotes around King James, around Theodore Beza, Stephanus, and especially Erasmus. There's probably 20 anecdotes about Erasmus and how he compiled his Greek text that have been clearly debunked. I find that probably every 2 months at the moment, there's a new anecdote of Erasmus coming out. He did something else. He sort of slipped on a banana peel and came up with this other reading that was a print error, and that's ended up in the King James somehow. And so you go to the mat on this and you study this and you go through it, and eventually you come to the point where you can prove that that's wrong. But then they just move on to another anecdote and another anecdote. And so the thing is, King James had 8 children. He was the only royal who actually slept in the same bed as his wife for the duration of their marriage. So he had one wife. And where in most other royal palaces in Europe, they had separate chambers for husband and wife. He was renowned for writing love letters to his wife their whole life. So it was a romance story that was well known in England. And if you just look into the history of it, if you were to get, say, a historical book like The Cradle King, it has all that information in there. But then to make things saucy, the BBC style of documenting things, they have to have him being some sort of bisexual, he's gay, and I mean, just look at the way he's dressed there. That's when he's a little child. I mean, people just read into that. There's pictures of Henry VIII, who no one would ever consider as being gay or bisexual or anything, dressed as exactly the same. And so people just have this accusation against him. He had 8 children. So this type of scandal would have been absolutely huge. The Roman Catholics would have used this against King James in his lifetime had this been a common thing in his life. But there's no word of it. People like Leonardo da Vinci, he was tried for sodomy. He went to court for that. So it's quite clear that, but he was actually, he was let off. So whether he was falsely accused or whatever, that's well known, it's documented. But there was nothing like that in King James's time, absolutely zero. And what is true is that there was the gunpowder plot where they tried to blow the whole entire parliament up. It would have been like a 9/11, but they found Guy Fawkes and the rest of the guys trying to destroy parliament through a terror act. So people were coming against this king vehemently. Of course, this type of accusation that he's a homosexual or he's a bisexual, this would have been huge, especially seeing he wrote a book against sodomy and said it was the most vile sin that anyone could commit. How can you have someone saying that, being a public figure, but then all at the same time he's flagrantly, openly homosexual or bi, or it just doesn't make any sense historically.
So real quick before I respond to that, MathPig does want to ask a question, and also we have a new person in the live chat, but we're going to pin that real quick because this is a good talk so far. MathPig, you had a question for us. Go ahead.
It'll tangent, so I'd rather everyone finished with the points and they're making about the debate and stuff, because I don't want to tangent away from the conversation. You are having a good conversation. It's an overarching question with suspense, as Mike put it, but I don't want to diverge from what you are talking. So if you are happy that you are finished.
Certainly. I appreciate that. Chris Lucas, go ahead and give us any thoughts that you have so far.
Well, just the main one, which I never hear on any of these debates, these King James onlyist debates, which is Job 17:6, where they translate the King James Bible mistranslates. It's like topet into tabre. Well, that should be the word spit, and yet King James translates it into tabre or tabarine. Or tambourine. So I'm just like, I'm just kind of curious what someone like Nick would say to that.
Okay, so I'm just looking that up. There are hundreds of verses that people point out that are wrong in the King James, and so I do try and make the effort to go through every single one of them. So that was in Job, and that was chapter 6. Was that correct?
17:6, verse 7. I mean, chapter 17, verse 6.
Okay, so the New King James says, "But he made me a byword of the people, and I have become one in whose face men spit." Where the King James says, "And aforetime I was as a tabret." So the Complete Jewish Bible, commentary by Rashi, says, "And I will be like a drum before them." So that would be like a tabret. So that's the Hebrew Bible there. There's quite a lot of Bibles.
Drum. Drum is a root word for tabre.
Okay.
Yeah, but that it clearly says topet, and it's the same way as like when we go. Well, it sounds like the English word spit. I mean, I'm reading it right here. It's topet. That's like spit. I mean, it's clear. I mean, I don't know how much more clear it could be. It's not drum. I mean, like, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that Jewish translation, but I know that word should be spit.
Okay, and so to really do justice to that, I would have to, sit down and work through this, because it's just, it's one of those things where it's thrown up. We're live, and it would probably take me,
I understand that. Yeah. But I just thought I'd throw that out there because it's like I've watched about maybe 6 hours of these such debates, maybe 10 hours of such debates. I actually saw you in Synagogue's last debate you did together, and I just noticed it's one that no one brings up. And I did love that debate, by the way. That was a good debate. You guys both had great information.
Thanks for that. So I'm just going to Bible Hub with that one. So definitely there's a difference between the New King James and the Old King James there. So one has one was the tabret, and the other one has in whose face men spit. And so I'm just going to look at the Hebrew there. Okay.
I guess I probably should have finished my point before I did this, because it looks like we are kind of going to other areas. But nonetheless, it's fine.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was
No, you're
kind of
good.
scared to throw that out. So sorry about that.
No, that was kind of my fault. I should have just finished the King James homosexual conversation with Nick and then asked you guys to chime in, because I should have known that was going to happen. We'll return to it, though. It's fine.
Okay. So this is what's called a hapax legomenon, which means that it's a word that only appears once in the Bible. And so oftentimes people will go to different texts. And so especially in modern translations, they will say, oh, we went to the Septuagint, or we went to the Dead Sea Scrolls, or we went to the Targums, or we went to the Ugaritic. And so, yeah, so that would be, I would have to do quite a bit of extensive study on that one to come up with a definitive answer that I'd stand behind.
Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you don't hear something and it really is hard to debate. So I understand. That's why I was always scared to debate, and I always admire your guys' courage, because it's like I'd be feeling weird getting in a situation like that. So I'm not going to say anything bad about you responding like that. But I will say, in Strong's Concordance, when I'm looking at it, it says it's the act of spitting. So, and I'll just leave it at that.
Well, the Strong's actually comes from the translations, I believe, a lot of it. Now, the LXX is my go-to, boy, when there's all kind of conflicts like this, and it says, what really makes sense, it says, but thou hast made me a byword among the nations. I am become a scorn to them. That flows very good. I think the 70 got that one right.
It might sound good, but it's still topeth. Or I guess it's kind of how you would say it, and to me that just, it sounds like spit. I've heard people translate it as spit. The other translations say it's the word spit.
Yeah, some of them do. Yeah.
Yeah, I just go by that, and I just, to me, that's how it was. The word was explained to me, and I just go, and I'm like, well, that makes sense. In English, you go spit like that, and it means spit, and so I'm like, yeah, it all makes sense. So I mean,
but what does it mean in Hebrew?
I can get with it.
What does it mean in Hebrew? See, that's the problem, because Hebrew words aren't spit. I always go to the LXX when there's kind of conflicts. Here you got about half the translate. I got 26 translations. About half of them say maybe spit, maybe a third of them. Some say tamarines. They say all kinds of different things. Spit is used a lot, but it doesn't make sense really, because that we should use modern translations to translate something that's ancient. Now, the most ancient translation, well, although we know they're not any ancient manuscripts, but the LXX is pretty traditional, and it says scorn, which flows perfectly. I mean, absolutely perfectly in that. So it's really hard to get hung up on things like that, because you can argue with them all day long and you're never going to come to a solution.
Well, that was part of the reason I had asked the question I did, which now obviously I am biased, right? This is why I always quote Proverbs 27, is because it's better to get the criticism from without, because I obviously have a bias being one of the participants. But that being said, I thought the question on standard, what are we comparing to, was an absolute killer. And the fact that David kind of fell into the trap, even seeing it beforehand. In other words, it was like he was looking at the trap and then just kind of jumped in it anyway. I was a little shocked by that, to be honest with you, because if you concede that your standard is, you're saying right now we can talk about these, which one's oldest and more reliable and all that forever. Well, I have all these different examples of areas that I believe the King James is wrong on, that the New King James would improve on. And I listed them
Well,
all.
so do I.
But my point though is just to say, so when I ask him, okay, KJV says stones, NKJV says thighs. So how do I know which is right? What am I comparing it to? What's the standard here? And the standard is the KJV. And it's like, okay, well then what you've effectively done is rendered us incapable of actually examining the KJV, right? Because anything it says is right and anything that diverges is wrong by the necessity, by necessity of not being the KJV. And that gets really interesting. We weren't able to get into it today because we were talking specifically about modern translations. But that gets really interesting when you start talking about pre-King James translations, because a lot of times pre-King James translations agree over against the King James with things like NASB or stuff like that. For example, the Geneva would translate in and this is just 1599, just like 12 years before I think it's 1599. I'll have to double check on that. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but it's in the 1500s that the Geneva was published. So it's just a couple years before the King James, and it would read in Acts 12:4, Passover. Now, granted, there is a little bit of a equivocation in the sense that Passover and Easter were kind of interchangeable terms for both holidays at one point in time. So I do grant that. I also think that's where the confusion actually ends up coming. So in other words, I think that's something that ends up going against the King James more than for it. But the ultimate point is just to say the KJV is kind of alone in Easter. I don't think it's completely alone. I'm sure there's some other versions, but for the most part, before, after, it's pretty well alone. And if your standard is the KJV, that fact doesn't even matter, right? In other words, if we can't examine this with the underlying manuscripts, with the underlying textual tradition, that just becomes a completely irrelevant point to a KJV onlyist. And I don't know. I personally kind of thought the debate was basically conceded at that point, even if I didn't do a particularly great job. It seems like that question is an absolute killer if you grant it.
Yeah, can I add something to that? Because okay, this is where as long as you're not getting in a debate about someone like Easter being a pagan holiday, if you're going the other route where Easter's supposed to be in there and it's actually a good word, well, this is the strongest argument I can make for Easter having no business being in there. If you can agree that if the King James onlyist agrees that it's a good word, which is in the preface or is the appendix somewhere, I can't remember where it's at, but it describes how to find Easter forever. And guess what? It can't be translated. It can't substitute the word Passover because Passover doesn't happen every Sunday. Like if I was writing a book and I only use the word bad one time and I go, man, when I was living in the ghetto, bad meant good. And I wrote that in the preface of the book. And then you read the one time I use the word bad, I never used it in the whole other book. And I go, man, that's a bad car. You cannot come up later, hundreds of years later, and go, hey, he meant good. Well, no, I meant the word. I mean, you can't come back hundreds of years later and say, oh, he meant the word bad when he said bad. He meant not good. And I actually meant, cool, really good, right? So they define the word. They set they define the word in the King James Bible. It's every Sunday. So if you take and you use it in a passage and you use Easter for Passover, well, Passover is not every Sunday. You already define the word. So you cannot. So now if you use that word for Passover, how is it that you can now? I mean, it's like to me, that's what doesn't make sense. Easter doesn't. Passover doesn't happen every Sunday, but the word Easter is supposed to be every Sunday, and they defined it that way in the King James. So right there, boom. To me, that's over, right?
Well, one thing that, and I want to actually say, one thing I appreciate about Mr. Sayers here is he doesn't take the Easter as a pagan holiday route, because that's completely untenable. And especially considering the underlying Greek is Pascha, but even besides that, Easter itself is not. It doesn't have any relation to the to pagan holidays. But even just that being besides the point, the underlying Greek at Acts 12:4 does say Pascha, and Pascha is an interchangeable term in Greek. It can mean the Pesach or Passover, and it can also mean what we call Easter, which is a word that's actually ultimately derived from a word Easteron. And actually, to this day, the Greeks still call Easter Pascha. They don't actually call it Easter, and most other countries do as well, or some variation of that, right? Like, so for example, the Spanish-speaking countries like Mexico, just right south of our own border here, if you live in the States, they call it Pascua. So for the most part, Easter is limited to English speakers or German speakers, or people with Germanic languages like Dutch and Austrian. And that's because the word Easteron is actually an Anglo-Saxon word. It has no relation to the word Ishtar, right? They still all call these words Pascha. Now, what ultimately that means is that when Acts 12:4 references Pascha, you can see where the confusion is arising, right? Because it means two different holidays in their language. But nonetheless, you can't start claiming that Easter is a pagan holiday because the word they're using is specifically in reference to the Passover or the resurrection holiday. So you really do ultimately have to make the argument, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but this is what you tried to argue in our debate. You basically have to argue that they're actually talking about Resurrection Sunday. They're talking about the holiday Easter and not actually Passover, or you have to argue that the Easter here is meant to refer to the Jewish Passover, which I think is very odd considering the fact that it doesn't translate this word that way anywhere else. But nonetheless, it seems to me like it's a very problematic thing. And here's the problem it creates too. We have Living Proof in the live chat. By the way, shalom, Living Proof, and thank you for being here. But Living Proof says Easter was a pagan holiday. And that, with respect to Living Proof, that's 100% incorrect. It can be very easily demonstrated. I recommend you check out my Hux Mayock video on this channel on Easter, because it's something that has been fed to us by anti-Christians who want to discredit all of our holidays. But nonetheless, and all of our traditions and customs and church history and who wrote the Bible and all that, they discredit a lot of stuff. They want to make Christianity look like a joke, right? But with that being said, one of the biggest reasons people still hold on to that Easter is pagan lie is because of stuff like Acts 12:4 and a mistranslation of that word. Now, that has nothing to do with the text itself. It's not like the text itself is incredibly dangerous, but the way people have used that is I think, problematic. It's not necessarily dangerous in the sense that you're a heretic, but it is problematic. You start going and attacking people for celebrating pagan holidays that don't actually exist, right? And never have existed. And we could easily fix that by just simply updating it to Passover, which is what I think it meant to communicate in the first place. But I've been long-winded on that. That's
well, I think his point was that Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were over with, so the Easter that was referenced by KJV would have to be like the literal Easter that you propose doesn't exist. I think was his point. But no, go ahead.
No. My point is, okay. See, I agree with everything Synagogue just said, which is it's not necessarily because Tyndale, he used it back and forth. He would use Easter one passage and Passover another passage, but my problem with the King James Version is they only use it one time. In the front of the book, they define the word Easter. It's every Sunday. Well, they used it they substituted the word Passover for Easter, right? So if you define that word and it's going to be every Sunday, but in that passage, it wasn't on Sunday, was it? Was that particular Easter? Was that particular Passover on Sunday? So you can't. But even then, you still said it's every Sunday. You already defined the word. See, and when Tyndale used it back and forth and interchangeably, he didn't say, Easter, how to find Easter every Sunday. No, he said he just used it interchangeably, but you have it already defined. You only use it one time, and you mean to tell me the one time you use it, it's used incorrectly? So
I think it's anachronistic accident. These people were obviously celebrating Easter when the King James was translated, and anachronisms do sneak in once in a while. Well, like in the Old Testament, they used an anachronism for Ramses. So I've debated people on this. Mostly atheists come up and say, "Hey, look, your Bible's not correct. There was no Easter back then," and so. I usually try to avoid discussions of it because there's no solution really. They made a mistake, I think, and probably an honest mistake, an anachronism for Easter. And in their days, that Easter is the Passover time when Christ was crucified. I just think it was an honest mistake, honest anachronism, an honest scribal error, not even really an error, just a slip of the tongue, you might say.
Well, now from Hebrew root point of view, real quick, the resurrection Sunday, we believe he was raised on the Sabbath, and then that Sunday, well, that Sabbath night, that Sunday is the barley sheaf wave offering, the first of the first fruits. We believe he did the first fruits wave offering, but that first fruits is every Sunday during the 12-day event known as Passover. It's always a Sunday.
Well, I guess I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it just went quiet for like the first time and maybe, well, I don't know, an hour. I think I'll jump in and say bye. It was very appreciative to have me on, CJ. I didn't get a chance to talk because it's fine, doesn't matter. Other people with better points to make. But thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it. Anyone wants to call by, we have open panels on a Saturday and all that rest and blah, 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 blah. YouTube bullshit. Mike, you should not be eating a pizza with a fork. I don't know what you're doing. But I appreciate everybody for accepting me, and thank you very much. And yeah, hopefully I'll pop by if our times match again, CJ.
Good night.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you being on, and we'll have hopefully a conversation again here soon.
Yeah, I'll ask Rage to get your details. He has awful nice things to say about you. Why not? What he missed. Right. Talk to you later. Thank you very much. Bye.
Elon Musk is buying Manchester.
So I'm sure we're gonna have Nick jump back in because it looks like he's having video problems, but I do want to give him an opportunity to respond to some of the stuff being said there.
Can I make another point about Deuteronomy 32:8?
Yeah.
The first time I read that, now I hadn't been saved very long. It took me 2 years to get a full Bible. I was using the Gideon New Testaments for the first couple of years, wore the covers off of them. But once I got around to reading the Old Testament, that was really the first verse. It just didn't make sense. What's all that racket?
I think that's his microphone that kind of sounds like a.
Oh, is that oh, yeah. I heard people complain about that during the debate. The next verse after Deuteronomy 32:8, okay, let me read it again. It says, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. But when he separated the people of Babel, I mean, that was centuries before Israel showed up. Well, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, or it didn't to me at the time. And later, when I finally got around to reading some other translation, and in particular the LXX, and I pored over that, it suddenly made sense that he set the angels according to the, and he set the nations according to the sons of angels of God. Now, what was really convincing, what really convinced me is that was correct translation, was in Deuteronomy, is it 4? 19, Moses said, unless thou lift up, talking to Israel, unless thou lift up thine eyes into heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord thy God has divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. So here he's talking about the host of heaven, which, they're around his throne in, somewhere. So the host of heaven are angels that are around his throne. They're like his counselors or his whatever. The one with, I think, with Balak or whatever. Anyway, now here he's saying pretty much the same thing. That's a little hard to read. Which the Lord thy God hath divided into all the nations under heaven. That's really pretty much what he's saying in Deuteronomy 32:8. But if you look at the LXX version, which he's talking about the angels of God, dividing the angels of God to the nations. And then there's another verse somewhere. Let me see if I can find it.
So, like each nation has an angel? Is that what you're saying? You think each nation?
Yes, I think that was what he was talking about. And that, another verse that really confused me in the New Testament was how in the heck did Satan get control over all the nations? Well, if there were angels that betrayed God or left him or rebelled against him, controlling all the nations, that made them all wicked, or more wickeder, I guess a better word, then Satan, being their leader, I guess, chosen to be their leader, he would control all the nations. Because, he said, Christ, I'll give you all the nations if you'll fall down and worship me, all the kingdom. Well, then, of course, Christ rejected that. And then as soon as he was resurrected, he told his disciples, well, right before his ascension, said, all power is given to me under heaven and earth. So how did that happen? Well, by dying, he destroyed the works of the devil, or at least the works up till that time. And what was one of the works of the devil? Well, he controlled all the nations. All this stuff.
Well, I think Paul explains it.
Look at that. I'm
sorry. I think Paul. No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I wish we could, hey, raise my hand or something. But no, I think Paul explains that away, saying he has put all things under his feet. Talking about Psalm 110. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh at the right hand of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh until I make all your enemies your footstool. Like Paul says, he says that, but yet we see all things are not yet put under him.
Well, so, it takes a long time to clean up a mess like we had.
It does, brother. Babylon will fall, though. Babylon will fall. I guarantee.
In Psalm 82, which is another passage I stumbled across, and it just really didn't make a lot of sense. But the very last verse, when he's talking to these gods, in which he says, ye are my children, ye gods, right? And all of you are children of the Most High, but ye shall die like men. Well, why would he tell them that if they were men?
Well, Moses
he told them that because they weren't men, they were angels. Pardon?
Well, Elohim is used. Moses was Elohim to the people, and Aaron his voice box, whatever you call it, voice. Elohim. It sounds like Elohim. That's gods. That's the plural of gods. So it sounds like Elohim, like those would be our judges in the book of Judges. Elohim. The judges are Elohim. So I think he's speaking about our judges, our presidents, our popes, our kings, stuff like that.
That was the way I originally read it, but by saying ye are gods, all of you are children of the Most High. Naturally, I thought of Israel, but then that next verse just threw me. He said, "Ye shall die like men." Well, of course they're going to die like men. They're men, right? Why would he say that? Well, I know there are no idle words in the Scripture, none. So he said that for a purpose, and fall like one of the princes. But now the very next verse says, arise means resurrect yourself, right? Jesus says, I laid down my life, I'll take it up again or whatever. Judge the earth, for thou shalt inherit all nations. So right after the resurrection, he inherits all nations. Before that, Satan had him. That's a really powerful prophecy there. Uh, so to me, all this falls together, that the angels control the nations. God assigned them, they rebelled, to one to each nation. They led it. There's actually a verse that talks about how he led them to their allotted land. I think that was the one I read earlier, the Deuteronomy.
We get the king we deserve. With the leaders that we vote for or that we are suppressed under, we get the ones that we deserve. The scripture says.
But look what he says in verse 2. He says, how long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? Now, if he's saying this to all nations, or is he saying this just to Israel? Because obviously Israel didn't reign over all the nations, not at that time anyway. Defend the fatherless and the poor, do justice and afflicted. Anyway, he goes on, and he says, I have said unto you, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, sons of God. Well, sons of God in the Old Testament, every time I have spent some time trying to figure out what he's saying, it's always talking about angels, divine beings. Even in Daniel and the Lion's Den, the Son of God was a divine being. So
But
if they are divine beings,
the sons of God were going in Job. The sons of God were going up to see him. Almost, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the feasts, but you have to go to Jerusalem to do the feasts. That's when the males over 20 are commanded. You're going to take your family, but it's a command.
It says feast in Job.
No. It says in Job. It says that the sons of God, the sons of man. Let's see.
They went to present themselves before the Lord, and
right,
Satan came through. Right.
Yeah, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I can go anywhere I want on earth." Yeah.
Well, no. At that time, he could go anywhere he wanted in heaven.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't kicked out of heaven until much later. Jesus said, from days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. And Jesus, then later Satan was kicked out of heaven. When he got out of heaven, he went to make war with the remnant of the big great woman's seed in Revelation 12, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So we know when he was kicked out of heaven, people were already preaching the gospel.
I think we look at that like he was kicked out of heaven in Genesis, along with his minions, and then asked for more time, and I think God gave it to him. But he still has access up, especially during a feast, to when God is supposed to be like at the feast for all the people that are coming up there, and then he shows up like, "Hey, I'm here." You know what I mean? It sounds like but in Revelations, he's finally kicked out. Like you don't even get access. You're stuck up, like Jamie says. You're stuck on the earth with a bunch of on a dead planet.
Until he was bound.
Until he was unbound.
Do you remember when I think it was Balak, when the host of heaven, and that's the exact words I believe they used, the host of heaven was before God talking to him, and one of them said, why don't I go down and be a lying spirit unto him? So
yeah, you can't hit him head on. The only
were the host of heaven. So this was like the same group of people, the host of heaven, the ones that Job was talking about. Oh, and by the way, that's one of the two places that the angels don't translate sons of God to angels. They translate it to sons of God, the LXX, I mean. All the other times they translate sons of God as angels.
But just like you said, we think Jesus. Well, we know. Excuse me. Jesus is the only begotten of the Father. He's the Son of God. And in that reference you gave a minute ago about us being the sons of God, it really makes you wonder: who are we? Are we supposed to be at the marriage ceremony of Jesus, or are we supposed to marry him? You know what I mean? It really gives you a pause on what we're reading into it.
John says that we will have power to become the sons of God.
Yeah, the Mormons take that and run with it and say you're going to be God. If you ever want to get rid of a Mormon, say ask them about the book, The God Maker.
Well, yeah, I didn't want to get in on that, but what he's saying is they weren't quite that way yet.
No,
That was future tense. Now, but in other places, it talks like ye are the sons of God. You know, if you're in Christ, it's a little confusing. But in the Old Testament, when I put all these things together, especially with Satan controlling all the nations, everything fits that God had assigned an angel to every nation to sort of be watch over them. Instead, they taught the rulers evil to do evil. They rebelled against God. So all the nations were corrupt when Christ showed up. And when he died, suddenly he no longer had whatever covenant he made with the angels, whatever promise he made to them. All that was over because once he's dead, there is no more covenant. The same with Israel. By dying, he released them from the Old Testament, was able to remarry them under the New Testament. That's Romans 7, 1 through 4. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Sorry, I took up a long time.
No, that's certainly all right. It looks like we keep having Nick jumping in and out.
Yeah, like the next time Nick is on, like whoever's talking, if they could just wrap it up real quick and let Nick talk. Because I kind of feel bad because it's like I really wanted to hear what he had to say from what I was saying like 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, but it is probably a good idea because, to be honest with you, it looks like he's having connection problems. I think that's what he said in the live chat too. Which, you know, that always sucks. I'm sure we all know how that is. While we're waiting on that, one thing I do want to bring up here that I think is particularly interesting is the hell translations. And I just kind of want to know what everybody here thinks about that. We won't tie this specifically to KJV, but it is related to KJV versus modern versions. So in the King James Version, you have hell translate, or the word hell used to translate, Greek Hades, or Hades, as we tend to say it, Gehenna, and then also the Hebrew Sheol. And there's been various arguments about whether or not all these are called. Oh, and Tartarus, also the Greek Tartarus, is translated as hell at some point, I believe. And a lot of people have said that this causes a lot of confusion as to the actual nature of hell. What is what? For example, did Jesus end up spending any time in hell or no? If you guys are familiar with the James White and Steven Anderson conversation, that ended up being the moment where they kind of broke with each other for a minute there. They were actually mostly on the same page. And then Steven Anderson said he thought that Jesus had gone to hell. And the James White said he thought that was heresy, right?
Well, wasn't that what the Psalm says?
Well, it depends on the version you're using, right? And that's actually the point of this question. So the English word hell is used in place of a Hebrew word, which is Sheol, and 3 Greek words, which are Hades, Gehenna. And I guess Gehenna is technically a Hebrew word, but it's given to us in the Greek New Testament, right? And Tartarus. And the argument is that Steven Anderson's confusion, if he has any, right? This is the argument for people who disagree with him, is a result of the King James versions translating all these terms as hell. Whereas obviously, then the other side of that would be there are various reasons why they would say Jesus is in hell as we understand it. So what are your guys' opinions on that? I'm curious. We got a lot of different.
Well, I do have an opinion on that. In the Revelation 20:14, it says, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. Okay. Well, hell is Hades. But right before that it says, but the lake of fire is not Hades, it's a whole different words. Right before that it says, and I saw the dead standing. Oh, wait, that's the next verse. And I saw the sea give up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which it's what you're in it. So Hades, this is a temporary place. Like you're dead, right? Well, Hades is hell. Now, I don't know if that means that if you're really bad when you're in Jesus talks like we're in hell. If you're bad, it's not a good place to be, but it's temporary because they're delivered up for judgment. Then death and hell were cast into the lake of fire, which is a totally different Greek words. So I believe Hades is a temporary place.
See, that's always kind of been my view as well, is that I think Hades is a temporary place of torment, and that and that Gehenna is probably analogous to the lake of fire, and I think Sheol, Hades, and hell are all analogous to each other. But then that does bring up the question, right? Is it a disservice that the KJV translates all of these places as hell? Does that create confusion? Or is that something
it does?
Kind of no harm, no foul?
Well, they do that a lot with other words too. It's just sort of the common theme throughout the scripture, throughout the King James Version. World is mistranslated to me at least once, several times. In some places they use earth and world when they should use land. You like the land of Israel or the land of Judea. I think they had a presupposition of premillennialism, which drove their translation. So when they saw end of the age, that end of the world in Matthew 3, I know that has confused an awful lot of people. When I first saw that, I said, that can't be, because God's not going to destroy this earth. He sent his son to save it. I at least knew that from being a child. So right then I was suspicious of that verse. Now I didn't know Greek. I had no other translation, no LXX or nothing, but I knew there was something wrong with that verse. I said, now this is God's word, but I was smart enough to know this is a translation because there's a lot of different translations. So eventually when I was able to afford some translations, I found out that other places, almost every other place, is translated as age. And then suddenly, I was no longer worried about that translation. But yeah, I think they got stuck on one word and they used it over and over again. In hell and Gehenna. See, where is Gehenna? Where can I find that? Is that? Oh, that's in 18:9. Yeah, hell fire. Now that's a whole different. That's like the lake of fire. That's a whole different word, a whole different theme.
Well, CJ, isn't that a real place? Gehenna, isn't that where it's kind of like the Kidron Valley for the Hebrews, where they dumped all their garbage and bones? Isn't Gehenna someplace like just north of Jerusalem or something, or a real place?
Yeah, it is. So it started off as a place where you would sacrifice children. It eventually became a trash pit.
Children? I'm sorry, I stepped away. Did you say children?
Yeah, the Canaanites used to use it to sacrifice children. And of course they do so by fire, right? And it's actually the Valley of Hinnom is what you would know it as there. And I believe Jeremiah references it as a place where Israelites and Canaanites went to go sacrifice children. And then eventually it became a place where you burned up trash, as well as a place where sometimes criminals would be executed, if my understanding is correctly. Is correctly. Who am I, Cartman? You guys, I'm serious.
So it's not a nice place to be.
Yeah, exactly. And then Jesus appears to use it. Then, obviously, the Valley of Hinnom being fresh in his audience's mind as a description of like hellfire, or at least
the
that's
fire
what
is not quenched and the worm does not die.
Exactly.
Isaiah 66. When their dead bodies, carcasses are laid out and they're like dung on the ground.
Jamie in the house.
I think that I may have missed it, but I tried to do a super chat that brought this up, and I would say it was kind of a stab at Stephen Anderson's teaching because of this misunderstanding. And if one were to say the KJV is the flawless word of God, they could easily think that they're justified in not making the distinctions of Hades and Sheol and Gehenna. And then they might think they're going to declare Christ Jesus went down to hell and burned in hell for 3 days, which is blasphemy, by the way, and should be discarded right away.
Well, and that is what Stephen Anderson teaches. And
he'll,
it is interesting.
He'll stand all over it because the KJV, the Perfect Translation, says so.
Yeah, and now, granted, that doesn't, of course, mean that all KJV onlyists would necessarily. I don't know if, like, Nick Sayers would, for example. In fact, I know he's not here anymore. I don't know if he'll end up coming back. But for those of you guys in the audience, my debate with Nick Sayers is one of my favorite debates I've ever done. So I recommend you guys checking that out. And not because I did some, like, incredible smashing job, by the way. It was because Nick is a very awesome interlocutor, and it was a really
he seemed like that. I'm sorry we had to lose him. I wish he would have come back.
Let me just say too, I have great respect for Nick Sayers, and I think he does a profound job of defending his position. In case I sound like a jerk,
I think he does an incredible job of defending a bad position. So I'll give him that.
That's
like, it's
kind of where I'm
incredible.
at with you, to be honest with you.
I mean, I know I was really amazed. Like, I was like, to me, I would be scared. I'm like, wow, he actually like defended it kind of coherently and everything. I was like, I thought that was hard. I think it's way harder to defend that than it is to defend King James onlyism than to defend the other side. So that's why I was kind of amazed. I was like, that he's probably one of the better debaters I've ever heard.
Well, and actually, before I go into my little point here, I do just want to say briefly on that note, I have seen debates where I believe Nick was the winner. Nick debated my friend Rob Rowe, and with all due respect to Rob, whose position I would have agreed with, it wasn't his best performance. I think Nick did a better job. But nonetheless, all of that. So the
nonetheless.
Side note.
I'm curious. Do you like that so much because your name is Nunya Biz, or is it just because it's taken a while?
It is. It was one of the critiques I went over with you and Donnie and Jamie at the time. We were trying to go over the technicalities of how to do like a podcast or radio or whatever, and I was pointing out how I was pointing out comically everybody's flaws. Jamie will ask a question like 9 different ways before even getting to the question, and you will say nonetheless. But you also had your 3 different uhs. Do you remember that? Yeah, they're good. 2 of them are good. 2 of them should be your trademark. They are so. But whenever you say nonetheless, yes, it is because I'm Nunya, and it's like nonetheless. It's like I'm gonna check. Yeah.
So here's the thing. Side note. That's John Maddox and Standing for Truth. So here's the thing.
No, definitely. It's another one with standing. The word sophisticated.
Oh,
that's
I know.
That's his.
You guys got to get more sophisticated. You guys just got to get like my position. It's just got to be. You're so unsophisticated.
To be fair, though, at least his is like a couple syllables rather than just right, or nonetheless.
Yeah, nothing. A pregnant pause has a great effect.
But he sits there. Donnie is so cool. I tease him all the time in his debates that he just all he did was put up a picture of himself. I don't know if it's called fishing or whatever. It's a fake picture of himself, and he doesn't move at all. He just sits there the whole time, doesn't move at all. And we know he's watching like Kent Hovind videos or in the background. Come on. He's just waiting for one of those keywords like, dead silence, and then he'll have to like click off. But no, it was so funny tonight, CJ. You started. I'll tell a story to you privately sometime. Never mind. But no, it's Donnie's excellent. CJ's excellent, and Jamie are excellent. Yeah.
Did he read my question, by the way? I never heard it.
I don't think it came up because I was looking at the comment section and I never saw it. Yes. So I wonder if you might have, because I've done this before, you might have like typed it in and typed in the amount you wanted to give and all that kind of stuff, and then just not actually gone through with it for some reason.
Oh, no, it came up on the screen. It came up in
Did
this chat, super chat. And then I clarified to make sure it's no one misunderstood. I said, that was in regards to Jesus' death and descending for 3 days and 3 nights. Because I just said, because the super chat was just like, should we presume that Jesus went to hell or hellfire or something like that, according to the KJV? And then I sent in a non-super chat thing to clarify it and make sure you knew what I was talking about. Because that is what you just brought up was exactly what I had in mind with that question. And I don't know. I think he just didn't want to say it because he knew it kind of stung. Maybe I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm just presuming. Maybe it's just too late, probably. But
To be
or
honest,
it was
I didn't see it.
yeah, maybe it was misunderstood. I don't know. But I wanted to comment really quick from Bible Research Tools or whatever said regarding the destruction of the earth. Yeah, he made it to be inhabited and all those quotes that people will bring up. I would say, but 2 Peter 3, the trumpet will sound or whatever. It's like the elements will melt with fervent heat and all the things in the earth will be burned up. If you want to make that like really non-literal or whatever, which is I would just say, have you read Zephaniah? Have you read, Isaiah 13 or Malachi 4 or, and many others, Jeremiah 25. I've been doing a study on the day of the Lord here. Isaiah 66, Jude 14:15, what Jesus suggests in Matthew 13. The connection of 1 Corinthians 15 with 2 Thessalonians 2. The day of the Lord sounds a lot like a day of utter destruction. Zephaniah, I want to know. I'd like to hear how people fit that into their theology.
Okay, well, I'll try. Well, what was the first one? Let's start with that. I can't remember which one it was now. It was
Zephaniah, the whole one chapter, whatever it is. Like if you carefully read it, it sounds like the earth is utterly destroyed. No inhabitants are there.
Yeah, that was like in Jeremiah when the Babylons destroyed Jerusalem. It was like a new heaven. He destroyed the whole earth, and some people actually push that back all the way to the creation day, the literalist. But it's really apocalyptic language. If you read when he said Assyria to destroy Egypt or to take them to take over their nation, control them. And of course, when Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, every one of these have apocalyptic language, and they always use things like the sun did this and the moon did that, and the stars fell and the heavens rolled back as a scroll, and it's all apocalyptic language, and it really talks about a change of the guard.
So are you a full?
For example, take 2 Peter, the first one. That was the first one you mentioned, 2 Peter. The heaven will be destroyed, and the earth will melt like fervent heat, and the elements shall melt, or whatever. I don't have the exact verse, but in other words, he talks like the heaven and the earth and the elements, whatever they are, will be destroyed. Well, the elements meant two things to the Jews. One of them was the markings on their temple decorations. They call those elements. The second was the elements, the rudiments. Paul calls them both, rudiments and elements. That's like the doctrine. You do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that, all the rules. Well, this is going to sound really strange to you, but Josephus talks about this, and some of the old commentators like John Owens or whatever his name was back in the 1600s. Well, they talk about the temple as three places: the Holy of Holies, which is heaven, they call it heaven; the inner court, which they call the earth; and the outer court, which they call the sea. Now, obviously, the outer court was for the Gentiles and the unclean Jews. They could not go into the inner court at all. That was like a crime of, a capital punishment type of crime.
Yeah, the temple.
So if you look at it from that perspective, Peter was telling the people the temple would be destroyed, and also the rudiments inside it and all the rules, probably where they kept all the rule books and genealogies. And if you look at it from that perspective, then it makes all the sense in the world. Well, go to Revelation 21, and what does it say? I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and there was no more sea. What on earth does that mean? I mean, who want to go there? There's no good fishing, right? Well, maybe he's saying that there's no more outer court, because remember in Ephesians 2, Paul says that Jesus broke down that middle partition between the Jews and Gentiles. He broke that. There's no more sea. It's only a court or an inner court.
The only problem with all that is it takes a full preterist view, and I think that's problematic to think we're in the.
I don't think I'm not a full preterist, because I believe that judgment is coming in the future. But I did get accused of that long before I ever figured out what a preterist was. I didn't. I'm not trying all I had was about. Okay, well, I know. That's like an aspersion to cut off debate. So I'm not going to accuse you of being anything either. Okay, but what I'm saying is this is exactly what you'll find if you read Josephus, if you read Moses, if you read. They had names for these things, and when Peter, if you go to 1 Peter and read, who's his audience? His audience were the scattered tribes. He was sent to the scattered tribes. He did go to a couple of Gentiles. Him and Paul had a understanding, him and Paul and John, and Paul was going to the Gentiles, which he didn't. He went to the Jews mostly, but he went to Gentiles too. But Peter and John were to go to the scattered tribes, and that's what James did too. You know, James actually opened his book to the 12 scattered tribes. But if you read Peter's first verse, he says in Greek, he's addressing the diaspora, the scattered tribes. Okay, so now you know who he's talking to. So when he uses heaven and earth will be destroyed, Jews in those days would not think of the heaven and the earth like the whole world or universe. They would be thinking about the temple. And they already knew it was going to be destroyed. Jesus told them that a long time, 30 years before, 40 years before. So they knew the temple's going to be destroyed. And everything he said would make absolute perfect sense to his audience, but makes no sense to people 2,000 years later, unless they go back and read all those old documents. Anyway.
I agree with a lot of that. The original audience had it was regarding Daniel 9, and that was talking about the temple being destroyed. And I would say that I would agree with all that. I would agree with probably what you're regarding the relations of the elements. I think I've heard scholars say it has to do with just the rudiments, like the ways of the world, as it were. And then you could say, but I would say because of the way Daniel's the time of the end and the way Jesus' first coming, and it correlates with his second coming regarding the book of Revelation and the things that were taught. And I don't think you can, like a lot of those things you were saying, I don't disagree with, but I would say they're somewhat types for the end of the world.
Daniel though points to the destruction of Jerusalem. Now during Standing for Truth's talk, he actually pointed this out. And I'll read my annotation of it, but Standing for Truth said the same thing during his. Now he believes in a second, what do you call that? That this is like a shadow, the first one in the first century, and it could be. Well, we don't know whether they are or not, because we can only see those in hindsight, and that's what our disagreement. But he said this, and I'll quote you really pretty much exactly what he said, but this is my version. And after 62 weeks, and then in parentheses, plus 7 weeks, or 483 years after the 457 BC decree of Artaxerxes, the anointed one, Christ, shall be destroyed, cut off, or crucified.
That's 26.
There is no judgment in him. He's dead. And he, Christ, who is alive again, shall destroy the city, Jerusalem, and the sanctuary, the temple, with or using the prince Titus that is coming. They, the people inside the city, shall be cut off with a flood of Roman soldiers, and to the end of the war, which is rapidly completed, he, Christ, shall appoint the city to desolations, and even the countryside was stripped of its trees by the Roman soldiers. They turned that place into, they just leveled it. Well, and that Daniel, well, it's so, to show you the actual absolute, what's a good word here, how Christ gets into the smallest detail and perfectly, well, God, it says the prince, Titus, right? Well, it just so happens maybe 6 months or somewhere in there before this happened, Titus became a prince because his father became the emperor. So it's absolutely perfect. Everything Daniel said, perfect.
Well,
Well,
people of the
now,
prince. It's people of the prince to come, specifically with the antecedent being the Messiah, as Jamie would memorizingly tell you. But from your reading of that, where you added so much, I would not disagree with any of it at all. But I'm not going to debate you on it right now. I just wanted to let you know that. Yeah.
well, I'm not expecting very many people to agree with me, but
Well, if you mean that Jesus is cut off after the 69th week, and then Titus comes in and destroys
well,
this.
it's actually, it says after the 69th week, not
Yeah, I
on the
agree with
69th week.
No, I agree.
It says after 62. This is the problem we had with Jamie. It says after 62. You guys are adding to make it 69,
No,
which is
Daniel
probably
added
correct.
it.
But
Daniel added the 7 weeks.
The 7 comes before the 62 in order.
right, so you're adding them up to get your 69, but the text specifically says after 62. So when you say after 69, you're making me nervous.
Well, it says there's 7 weeks and then 62 weeks, and after the
Right,
62,
right.
I
Why
didn't
don't they
think there
just
was
say?
any
Why don't they?
debate about
Why
that.
didn't
I
he just
thought
say?
everybody understood that.
Why
Let me
didn't he
go
just
back and
say?
look at the verse before it.
When they speak of multiple, when they like 62 or 69, they will say 2 and 60, 9 and 60. Okay, so they said 7, and then he says 2 and 60. So yeah, and then he says after 62. So whether
Right.
you're going to add them and get 69, or whether they're together, which is how we view it, okay, because it's two things coming: the Messiah and the what is it? I don't have the text in front of me. The Prince, but it's like it's the exact same person, but it's he's one at the 7 weeks and he's another at he got baptized by John the Baptist. 7 weeks later, he was at the wedding at Cana getting weaned. Okay, but if you still start at John the Baptist's baptism 62 weeks after that, okay, you're not adding them, the 62 and the 7. They have this exact same starting point, but at 7 weeks we have the Messiah because now he's weaned. Before that, he was under the authority of Mary, and then 62 weeks after that, we have his what we would call the Passion Week. He was on the 10th. He had his triumphal entry, and then mid of that week, he's cut off, but not for himself, and the oblations and sacrifices stop, and the transgression. Right. That, so we see that as complete, but we're looking for a final 7-year because we're adding up the years from Daniel. But if you want to add up the years from Jesus, you guys think there's a 3.5-year ministry of Jesus, and you're going to run out of your 70 weeks of weeks.
Well, no, wait a minute. No, not really, because what happens during the 70th week? There is a covet confirmation, right?
Well, not if you run out of weeks during.
Well, no, you don't run out of weeks, because Jesus told his disciples, "He that heareth you, receiveth me." Now, Paul said Jesus was a minister to the children of Israel, the covenant, whatever. So Jesus confirmed the covenant for 3.5 weeks. In fact, it's said in the very first part of Luke, I think, first.
That's right.
How he was going to confirm. Anyway, he confirmed the covenant for 3.5 weeks. Then he was killed. What's the first thing the disciples start doing? Peter, early in Acts, I think it's in the 3rd chapter, says, "Ye are the children of the covenant of the promises of." So he confirmed the covenant with Israel.
Hebrews 8.
They did that for 3.5 years, and then the 70 weeks was over.
Yeah, I don't know. I disagree. I'm sorry. We could talk someday about it, but no, I don't want to hold up the line. You're all right.
Oh, somebody else go. I'm done. I'm sorry.
You're okay. You sounded good.
I got like another point to make about the King James Bible. If everyone's ready to move to something else. Okay. Turtle doves. I really, well, one more thing. When you guys were talking about hell, it always reminded me of how the King James also doesn't translate the word murder and kill consistently. Like, because I think like sometimes it's like thou shall not kill, if I remember correctly. I don't read that often, and it's like, well, it should be thou shall not murder, and I have a problem with that because there's big differences between just kill and murder. And then my next point's in Leviticus. I don't like how they take a Middle English word, which was, Middle English is like 1150 to 1500. So, and King James is written 100 years after that, and they take a Middle English use of a word, turtles. Now, in Middle English, turtles means turtle doves. But so you're reading like Leviticus 14:22, and it says, and two turtle doves or two young pigeons, such as he is able to get. And then it's like and then the very next chapter 15, it's like or is it? Hold on, let me look just so I can be specific. Chapter 15, Leviticus 15:29. It says, two turtles, not turtle doves, two turtles and two young pigeons. And then in the same chapter, it's got turtle doves in 15:14. It's like, I mean, to me, that's confusing. Like, I mean, if you're a new believer and you're seeing that, and it's like, why, if that's the modern use of the word, just use the modern use. Don't use the way the word was used 100 years ago. It's already passed. So that's just one little issue I got with the King James also. So just throw that out there. Anybody else?
Well, I thought it was interesting that you pointed out the fact that it seems like everybody's missing about like what the one thing all the reformers agreed upon, in the Geneva side notes or whatever. Like, the reason we understand the Pope is the Antichrist is like that's one thing that actually everybody in the Protestant Reformation agreed upon. I mean, and like nobody. I mean, were they wrong? I mean, if they all had that kind of same interpretation, should they not have all thought that? I wonder. What do you guys think? I mean,
well, it was a historical interpretation of Bible prophecy is what they all agreed on. And part of that historical interpretation of Bible prophecy is that the Pope's the Antichrist. And that's one thing almost the whole entire Reformation was on. And then you had the Jesuits coming out with futurism and preterism and throwing things out there to see what sticks to take the heat off the Pope. And that's all I want to say.
If that's wrong, how can you say the Pope's the Antichrist if all of them took that method of interpretation? And then if we're going to say that that's the wrong interpretation, does that mean they were wrong to finger the Pope with that claim? I wonder.
Well, I think there's a couple things. One of the first things is you do have to remember, this always sucks to admit as a Protestant, but Protestants were just as swept up in the political situation at the time as anyone else would be, right? So a lot of people's the Pope is the Antichrist theology goes as far as he's the guy in the funny hat over there who's against us. And it really is that simple. Not all of them, obviously. Some of them have actually have good reasons. But it's not like everybody gave out a fully fleshed out reason, right? There's a political atmosphere around. And so certain people have certain reasons for interpreting that are just that simple. Now, as far as the actual good reasons to believe that the Vatican is the seat of the Antichrist, I think some did certainly use their historicism as a reason for that, but a lot of them would use things like, for example, Revelation 17. And I agree with this. Revelation 17 is painstakingly clear about a something in Rome. What it's not clear about is what that something is. But I think when you understand the symbology that Revelation uses around women, right, with bride being referencing the church, then whore would clearly be referencing a church of some kind, right? But not a bride kind of church, more of a fallen kind of church. It seems to me like a pretty clear prophecy of Catholic Church because of that. But even if that part was granted as reading in, what is abundantly clear is it's the city on 7 hills that rules over many tongues and nations. Everybody knows what the city of 7 hills is in the first century, right? It's like saying the Big Apple. There's nobody who's confused about what the Big Apple is. There's nobody who's confused about what Sin City is, what the City of Angels is. We all know what those are when I go through them, right? Because we live in America. Well, it's the same thing back then. When you say the city on 7 hills, they're like, oh, yeah, Rome. Okay. He's talking about Rome. And I think that's one of the big reasons people would give. Also, Daniel 9 seems to imply that the fourth kingdom doesn't ever actually fall, right? It goes into there's the iron, and then the iron goes into iron and clay. Well, the iron's still there, right? And a lot of people would point that out. It's like it doesn't look like Rome ever actually falls until this stone comes. So they would suggest, okay, well, if political Rome appears to be waning in power, or by the time we get to the Reformation appears to be gone, is there something else that we might be able to see there? And the answer, of course, is that political Rome never has left. It's just a church now. But they're still their own country to this day. It's called Vatican City. And the Pope is the sovereign there, and his Pontifex Maximus title is a direct carryover from high priest of the Latin religion before there ever was a Christian church there, right? And a lot of other things like that. You also had people who would make historical arguments, like these are the guys who claim to be the seat of the apostles, when in reality there's no evidence to suggest as much. And I think that's true. There is no evidence to suggest as much.
I have a comment on your, on
but all these
whore
other
and
kinds of stuff. So
harlot.
like with those things.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. And by the way, as it turns out, we have managed to get a Catholic to come out of the woodworks. But nonetheless, appreciate you being here, Fro. Go ahead.
Nonetheless,
Bible Tools.
Hello, hello.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay, you want me to talk? Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead with this whore harlot, Revelation 17:3.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Now, the Revelation says that Babylon the Great was the mother of harlots. Okay? Now, let me take you back to the Old Testament. Israel was always a whore and a harlot, like to God. Every time you turn around, he called them that. In Ezekiel 16, he says, he's talking about Jerusalem and her daughters, which I assume are her sister cities, in Israel.
Bethlehem,
Samaria and her daughters, and Sodom and her daughters. Okay. And in 1648, the Lord says, as I live, saith the Lord God, Sodom thy sister hath not done, she nor her daughters, as thou, Jerusalem, hast done, thou and thy daughters. There's another thing about Jerusalem too. The great whore had the blood of the prophets, apostles. In fact, she was avenged for that. God avenged her for them, their blood. Well, in Matthew 23, Jesus said that no prophet could be killed out of Jerusalem. He also said that the blood of all the prophets, and I think in Luke it includes the apostles, but all the righteous blood would be avenged on Jerusalem. And he said that generation, or this generation, all this shall come upon this generation, which it did. The whole city was destroyed, everything. So if Jerusalem is responsible for the blood of all the prophets, then Babylon the Great can't be anyone else by default except Jerusalem. Now, look at you were talking about Rome, the beast, the 7 head, whatever, the 7 hills. Yeah, I agree with you. The beast carried the whore, Jerusalem, for a long time. They were like a daughter nation, or whatever you want to call it, might want to call it, and supported them. In fact, the Caesar actually gave a sacrifice to the temple every day, believe it or not. That was a daily sacrifice by the Caesar to worship for their God, for Jews' God, our God. Well, But then they turned on Jerusalem.
Are you sure about that?
And
Because
so-
I'm not. I'm not.
I was
I'm
wondering,
sure
I was
about it.
wondering, I was
I'm sure
wondering.
about it. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure about it.
Myself here,
Josephus talks about it a lot and how that sacrifice was taken away after the three factions holed up inside Jerusalem, started warring against each other. Well, but anyway, it says that the beast, or the one that sits on the seven hill, carried the whore. But then later it says, when these kings or whatever that were given power by the beast, they made the whore naked and desolate and burned her with fire. Well, what kings were given power for 1 hour or for a short time or whatever? Those were the kings with their legions from all the different nations in the empire who were gathered together for the war. They were given power, and they're the ones that burned up the city, made her naked, desolate, made the whole city desolate, burn her with fire. Absolutely, I just can't see any way around it. But yeah, the part about the grain offering by Caesar, Josephus goes into it in some detail in his Wars of the Jews section of his historical narratives. And people inside the city, one of them, I don't remember exactly which one, took away that sacrifice and we're not going to give Rome anything. Now, this was probably after they'd already killed the high priest and all the other priests who were keeping them under control, keeping them restrained, you might say. But once the priests were killed, they just went crazy. In fact, Josephus said that if Titus had not destroyed the city, he was certain that the earth would open up and it would fall right down in. That's how bad it was. It was really evil what they were doing.
And actually, I support Bible research in this because it's even more explicit as you go on. Because in Revelation, it's abundant. Like John makes it clear that this city is Jerusalem. He says it emphatically. While at the same time, I will say that he uses imagery that refers to the city of Rome as well.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, but I would utterly disagree with CJ's understanding of the statue in Daniel, because he seems to think that, as he said, that Rome is still around. It's just not political Rome. And with all due respect, CJ, I think that's a very uneducated take, because it doesn't take into account just what Rome was. Because you are right in a way, CJ. The Pope is Pontifex Maximus. The issue is what that meant in the ancient world was very different from what that means now. When we say Pontifex Maximus, we mean the Pope. When Pontifex Maximus was said in the ancient world, that meant the emperor. The fact that the highest political office of the land was simultaneously the highest religious one was not a coincidence. Because the emperor was not just an emperor. He didn't just lead Rome's armies. He was the highest religious authority in Rome. Now today, you don't see the Pope lead armies. Instead, he negotiates with other leaders. That's because, Rome didn't have this conception of secularism that the Catholic Church did, that the Catholic Church actually gave to the world, mind you. And it is because when the Western Empire fell, and the Pope ended up having to take a lot of the power vacuum to stabilize the region, that back and forth he had to do to negotiate with other kingdoms is what formed the basis for what we understand as secularism now. That is why that's why you don't get multiple emperors, multiple Pontifex Maximuses. That's genuinely why. So to say that political power in Rome never ended, and it just became a church, that doesn't take into account what we see on the ground from the ancients. And moreover, just the way in which the church governs is worlds apart, even ethically, from the way the ancient Romans understood each other. Because how Rome understood itself was might makes right, essentially. Anything they wanted to do that was within their power would be done. Today, however, the church, no less than everybody else, is restricted underneath God's law that must be followed. This was not a concern for the ancient Romans. The only thing they needed was to make sure they had their God's favor, and the only thing their gods wanted was sacrifice. That's it. And so the fact of the matter is, when you as much as I respect you, CJ, this is just a really bad take. It doesn't take into account just the fathoms of difference between the Roman Catholic Church of today and ancient Rome as it knew itself and existed in antiquity.
Well, I think there's a couple things that are important to point out there, though. So the first thing is I wouldn't deny a lot of the changes, although I think I would quibble with the secularism one, specifically because secularism, as far as I understand it historically, is a result, I would even call it a direct result of the Reformation, specifically through not Martin Luther, who himself could care less for such an idea, but starting with Calvin, moving on to Knox, and then eventually we have the full manifestation of religious freedom ideals in guys like John Locke. I would subscribe to the view that if you look at the sort of progression of religious freedom through time, it really seems to be Calvin who is actually the first one to kind of be passing it around. And it eventually finds its full manifestation, like I said, in philosophers like John Locke, and then eventually, I think, in the creation of the United States, which is the only really, truly religiously free country I think that has ever existed.
When I say secularism, hold on, there we go. When I say secularism, what I mean is that secularism in the broadest term essentially means that there is a distinction between your church and the state. In the broadest possible terms, that's what secularism means, a realm apart from the religious. And that was understood as early as St. Augustine.
Well, and I'm sure there was certainly, because there's people even in the Jewish tradition who would talk about it, right? In fact, one of the key elements of the Messiah is that he bleeds together that which is not meant to be bled together. And you see kind of an example of this in the form of, first off, one of the prototypes of Messiah is, of course, David, who performs priestly functions. But then also when one of the descendants of David, Uzziah, as king, tries to perform priestly functions, he ends up becoming leprous. Right.
Yes.
So certainly not to say that there isn't elements of that all throughout history, but what I mean as far as like the manifestation of, and perhaps religious liberty is it is important to clarify secularism as separation of church and state is unique when compared to ideas of modern Western religious liberty. But I think you need one to have the other. And my understanding of what we have in the ancient world, even England at first wasn't actually separation of church and state or secular as we would understand it. In fact, I would argue up until the United States, I don't think there was such thing as a secular country. And even after the United States, I would argue that religious liberty is not really properly codified in any other document. And that seems to me to be an evolution of the Protestant Reformation, specifically a Calvinistic Protestant Reformation. Like members like Locke and, like I said, other members of the Presbyterian Church in the United States.
Yeah, I would agree. The issue is that Calvin does not get to have a secularism without a Catholic secularism preceding it.
Well, so I wonder about that, though, because, I mean, that's one of the problems that you have people having with the Catholic Church throughout history, right? And we can just give it now. This is a far in the future example from where Calvin is, right? Which Calvin doesn't have his ideas completely thought out yet. I think Knox probably does, but even Knox is not quite at the level that John Locke would be at, right? Ironically, that's 3 Johns in a row. Anyways, but like when you go all the way to the 1800s now, one of the big reasons that Napoleon, I guess it's late 1700s, but one of the main reasons that Napoleon wanted to lock the Pope up in the Vatican in the first place is because he was sick and tired of what was, from his perspective, meddling on the part of the church in political affairs that they didn't have any business in. Now, whether or not you think they had business in it, of course, is a different conversation. But the point is, the understanding was that the Vatican was very much involved in everybody's political lives. And I would even say probably more so than anybody in the modern West would be comfortable with. And what's the classic example of this is the Holy Roman Empire, right? Now, people exaggerate, certainly. The Holy Roman Emperor sometimes thought he was in charge, and the Pope sometimes thought he was in charge, and sometimes they thought they were in charge at the same time. It was a complicated situation, certainly. But ever since the days of Charlemagne, it was understood that the Pope does have a level of spiritual authority over the Holy Roman Empire, hence its name, hence the reason why they called themselves Holy and Roman, right? And on top of all that, though, the biggest thing that I want to kind of take away here is I think this is a little bit of a misunderstanding of my ultimate point when it comes to Rome never really falling. The nation of Rome, if you'd like to call it that, which I would, does still exist. The Vatican he's a monarch unto himself. He has subjects within his nations. He does technically have a very small army in the form of the Swiss Guard. And hypothetically, there's nothing from changing that, or from nothing that prevents that from becoming something that is more powerful in the future. In fact, the trajectory we're on indicates that such would be the case, because all the way as far back as 1929, the Pope was not even recognized or the Vatican, I should say, was not even recognized as a legitimate country outside of the governmental parameters of Italy, right? So it does seem like we're on a trajectory towards Rome being more and more politically autonomous. I think we'll live to see them, for example, become a member state. They're already an observer member, but become a member state of the United Nations. And in that sense, we still have.
CJ, real quick. Virginia, the state of Virginia. What does that mean, Virginia?
That's a reference to
Virgin?
Queen Elizabeth, actually. Virgin Queen.
Yeah, but it means virgin, essentially, correct?
Yeah, but it's specifically a reference to.
In our Washington, D.C., the diamond-shaped, part of the bottom half of the diamond has been sold out, but that diamond-shaped territory in the dead center of Virginia and Maryland ought to tell us something. Our capital is in Virgin, Maryland. Yes, we are still under Roman Catholic, whatever you call it, rule.
Very funny.
Well, I don't know if I would agree with that necessarily.
Gentlemen, I have to leave. I really appreciate all the time. CJ, this is great. Enjoyed the debate tonight, and I enjoyed this, but I got to get my sleep on. I'm an old man.
Well, I appreciate you showing up today.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. We'll see everybody.
Nice meeting you. Shalom.
Have a good rest of your night, man. God bless.
Okay, so anyway, kind of responding to that, you and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you seem to suggest that because the Vatican, and I guess rather the Catholic Church more generally, has political autonomy in and of itself, that must mean that somehow the power of ancient Rome is still among us today. Is that what you're saying?
I would say that. Somebody else can comment. I would say that Virgin Maryland. We as Hebrew roots, we look at the Holy Mother Church.
Real quick, Mike, you realize that Virginia is not named after the Virgin Mary, right? It's actually named after Queen Elizabeth, who was named the Virgin King. You realize that? So that's where Virginia gets the name from, right?
Well, I guess my point would be just leave out the Maryland for now. That's the other half of the Washington.
Yeah, now Maryland was actually named after Mary, but Virginia was named after Queen Elizabeth.
No, I'm just saying I don't care who it was named after. I'm just saying the word Virginia means virgin.
Sure.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, and then yeah. But no, Hebrew roots looks at it as the RCC is the mother harlot church, and that no offense, you guys, okay, we see all the Christians, any protesting Catholics, any Protestants are their little harlots of that mother church, and they all need to go, essentially.
Oh, CJ, we're friends in more ways than one, my friend.
yeah, that is true.
Anyway, so the issue going on with CJ's thesis here is that just because the church exists in a way of political independence does not mean it is the same Roman Empire that existed years before. Fact of the matter is, if the claims of the Catholic Church are in fact true, what that means is that the church, therefore, while not actively engaging in politics, nonetheless should have a level of influence in it. For instance, if someone wants to pass a law that completely how should I say, legalizes abortion all the way up to like 2 years of age of the child after they're born, which is a law that was actually flung around here in the States for a good hot minute. The Catholic Church then should have the authority to be able to authoritatively rule against such a law, because at that point, that political law also infringes upon the moral law of God that he demands his people listen to.
They do that. They do make up their own law, and you just never hear about it because they don't own any country. You know what I mean? They don't.
Well,
even though they're the power behind the power, like Moses was the Elohim to us, but we all had God the Father. It's like the Pope is just some nasty behind the scenes puppet guy, or it's this. What's that Daniel's feet? It's clay and
Clay and
sand,
iron.
clay and iron. Right. That's how you make iron. What do you call that? That's how you pour iron. You make a clay mold of it. It's not like the clay and the sand are mixed together and it's a really weak foot. No, this is like these feet are cast iron. That's what I'm thinking. This would be your cast. That's what the clay is. It's going to be strong. And yeah, our eagle. What you look at the Roman eagle during Jesus' time? It's the same emblem. It's the same people behind the scenes trying to change our. I don't want to get into it. I'm so sorry, but I'm just saying it's essentially the same Antichrist throughout the generations. Daniel says, unto the end of the war, many desolations. What war? We've had about 1 billion. Well, if you look at, essentially the destruction of the temple as a starting point, it's always been something Rome related, worldwide war.
Well,
Sorry.
so let's. I do want to. No, you're okay. I just want to address Fro's point real quick, just so it doesn't get lost. I do have a level of agreement with that. In fact, one thing that makes it, I think, interesting whenever we have you here is that I am pretty traditional Reformed, which means a lot of times we end up coming down on relatively similar sides. It's like, so for example, we've seen this in the past with like the holidays, right? The Reformed tradition has a lot of emphasis on things like Ascension and stuff like that, which are holidays that most Americans probably don't even know exist. And in the same way, there's the sense of political involvement that you also do see preserved in the Reformed tradition, mostly I think because of postmillennialism, although I am not myself a postmillennialist. But nonetheless, there is still this idea of, the church doesn't have state authority, but it does have a authority. It has the moral authority to speak for God whenever the state is out of line, for example, or when the culture is out of line. So I wouldn't have any foul with that. But you'll notice the Reformed Church, quote unquote, there's technically many, doesn't have governmental political power, right? And of course, there's a lot of other details that could be gone into with that but I don't really want to, just because of the fact that I don't want to get it diverged from the actual point. But I'm sure you would recognize that this isn't my only reason for thinking that things that go on in the Vatican are a little bit problematic, right? We had already referenced the Pontifex Maximus thing, for example. But in this particular situation, there's only one church that I know of that actually is a independent political entity. And in fact, only one religious body that I even know of, because I can think of like the World Council of Churches, for example. The World Council of Churches, as massive as they are, they're 660 million members, massive, right? They're this huge political group with a whole bunch of influence, and this huge religious group, with a whole bunch of influence, specifically political influence. But they aren't actually a nation. In the end, they meet in Geneva. Geneva is a city in Switzerland. Switzerland is a country unto itself, right? The
Yes.
Mormons, as powerful as they are, they meet in Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City's in Utah, the United States, a nation unto itself, right? And so on and so forth. I guess you could argue in a way for Israel, but Israel, even at the time of the prophets, was never really a church with a nation. Rather, it's a nation, an ethnic group, the Hebrews, who have a religion that they're strongly associated with. In a way, it's very similar to Irish Catholicism, although Irish Catholicism obviously does not originate from Ireland. But I don't know of any other religious body that actually has political power, that has had and commanded militaries in the past and could potentially in the future. I mean, the Swiss Guard is still technically a military, so they even do now, although I think it's like 250 members. It's some ridiculously small number. But nonetheless, you see what I mean? Like, it's not just simply having a political say. It's the fact that this is a nation that hypothetically could have status in the World Council of Churches and the United Nations at the same time.
Sure. Yes, I'm aware of that.
So that's kind of an interesting thing to admit, though, there, right? Because you say what we're saying is Rome. There's a nation of Rome. They'll call it Vatican now, but we all know it's the Roman Catholic Church, right? That's what we've been calling it for quite some time. The Pope's seat has always been in Rome. Everybody knows that, right? So Rome as a nation has never ceased to exist. It's always had independent political power 2,000 years running now. Really, it's 2,700 years running now.
You know, again, I would make a mistake in thinking that the Rome of the ancients, of, as you said, 2,700 years, is the same thing today. Fact of the matter is, when you compare the Roman Catholic Church to ancient Rome, they are not the same thing. We are different politically, ethically, even ethnically. Like the Roman, literally the people of Rome in Rome today are not the same ethnic people of Rome that were living in the city 2,000 years ago.
But
Because
their history,
change, like
their
empires rise, empires fall.
But the baggage behind them, the baggage behind that exact same people, so to speak, I understand what you're saying about time going by. 60 million people have died because of that exact peoples.
Well, okay, well then by that same logic, then Mike, every single you, me, and CJ are all English then. By that same logic, because we have that baggage behind us too. That doesn't, but that I guarantee you, nobody here thinks that. So
yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to come out of. We want to come out of that Sunday worship, that whole Christmas, Easter, saved forever, once not sever, saved Molinism. We want to come out of that. That's so ridiculous. That's what we're trying to get away from. Let's go back to sola scriptura, actually.
I'm sorry. I have no idea how that refers to this conversation, but I'll continue real quick. The fact of the matter is that when you look at ancient Rome, it is not the Catholic Church. Like, it is so utterly removed from us. They're not the same.
Yeah, the Catholic. We look at the Catholic.
This actually happened. There was a time when Julius Caesar had to go to war against the Gauls. And he marched into Gaul. Slaughtered the armies, but he is credited and kind of celebrated for the fact that he killed 1 million. He killed 1 million Gauls and enslaved another. These weren't combatants; these were men, women, and children. Like, Julius Caesar basically committed a genocide before the term was invented, and Julius Caesar was celebrated for this. This is not something any pope ever did in the church's 2,000-year history. Not from Peter to Francis was anything like this done, nor was it ever condoned. So the fact of the matter is that just ethically, we're not the same. And financially, we're not the same either. We don't use the same economy now. And
it's the same principalities, the same powers that we are told. It's not an actual human. It's that exact same thing, though.
Well,
okay, if it's the same principality, hold on. If it's the same principality, then the Pope should be saying that he has a right to lead every Christian nation as an emperor, but no pope ever made such a claim. Literally
just-
no one.
They
If you're
just
going
say
to
they're
say,
God Almighty on earth. They don't need to.
if you're going to say
hang on.
supreme principality, that has to follow.
So I think there is we lost Jamie. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here that I want to get to, because we got completely off the KJV, but that's fine. This is a very interesting conversation. So the first point you'd said, it's kind of like saying we're all English. And I think it'd be a little bit more like saying the English are Anglo-Saxon. In other words, is there major differences between the Anglo-Saxon tribes and the modern day English? Certainly, no doubt. But they are one like continuing ethnic group, one continuing culture that has had its evolutions over time, but have always, at least since what it was like 1080 or something like that, whenever it was that the Anglo-Saxons actually conquered Britain, for over 1,000 years have had continuous presence in the land there and have had a continuous existence. And the continuity isn't even necessarily the point either, right? You have like the Assyrian Orthodox Church, called so because the majority of their members are ethnic Assyrian, or Aramaean is another thing that they're called. We tend to call them Syriac these days, but nonetheless, they're not the exact same as the Assyrians of 3,000 years ago. But there is a cultural connection between the two different groups, which is why they use the same name. They're, in this case, ethnically related as well. And so you can see, a similar separation there as the Anglo-Saxon English. And I would say you have a similar thing with, I don't know what you actually call somebody who was born and raised in the Vatican. I don't know if Vaticanese is a word, but a modern Roman and an ancient Roman. We'll just go with that.
Okay, nobody's born in the Vatican. Go ahead and continue. That's hilarious. Born in the Vatican. No,
it is the nation.
Yeah, it's got its own fence too. But no, I think it's all male. I'm joking. Go ahead.
But the thing is, though, CJ's point, though, I mean, it's confusing. Like, I mean, if you're a state now and you're a Catholic and you're calling this leader of another country Holy Father, I don't know how you can be loyal to what other country you're in, because you're calling this other guy Holy Father. And, you say that that I was wrong to say that the Catholic Church wants to unite city and state.
Just one second, Chris.
Okay.
Just 1 second, because I just want to, because I think that's a fair point, but it is a different point. So I just want to address this one real quick. So,
Sure.
Because Fro's the only Catholic in here, so he's obviously going to get somewhat ganged up on, and so I don't want to give him too much, right? Which is fair for anybody else who comes in here, by the way. Just so you guys know.
Go ahead. I can take you all on. I'm fine.
So it's a continuing political entity. I would argue in many ways a continuing culture, as evidenced by, for example, usage of Latin. Usage of certain terms like Pontifex Maximus, which is not even necessarily saying that this is the same as the Pontifex Maximus, right? I do want to be clear when I say that. What it is you have this position of high priest, right? At one point, this high priest was the Latin high priest. At another point, it became this sort of Greco-Latin high priest once the Greeks started to influence them. Then it eventually, as you had pointed out, became an emperor after Julius Caesar, then Augustus, and so on. And then eventually it gets moved to the Bishop of Rome. But it's the same position each time, which is the high priest of Rome. It's just the exact qualifications of what that means have certainly changed over time, right?
And I will say this: if you mean that the Catholic Church has a cultural, historical connection to ancient Rome, that much I can concede. But what I would absolutely fight against is the idea that essentially the Catholic Church is nothing more than the continuation of Rome, which I don't think that. I think that's a very, very untenuous argument.
Well, I don't think when I say Catholic, don't get me wrong, I don't look at the post 4th century Catholicism to me is what I'm referring to when I say the Roman Catholic Church. They want to try and claim Peter as the first pope and then Lioness or something as the second pope, on down the line. But that to me is completely fake as well. But no, I'm not dog. And like I think CJ will refer to himself as a Christian, and he'll even speak of the followers of Jesus as Christian. But I just have to let that go. We don't really look at Christian to us as somebody that does the Sunday, like I said, the Christmas, Easter. Oh my God, they'd probably even do Halloween. But they don't.
Halloween
have
is a Christian holiday.
Yeah, day All Saints Day, the next after midnight, right? But it's when the tradition trumps God's law is that we get upset, and that's just nothing what the Catholic Church does except that.
Okay, I would obviously disagree. Sunday worship is seen from the very earliest centuries of the church. In fact, I would even appeal to the Didache for that, because the Didache, which is essentially the very first catechism of the church, is outside of the New Testament, is the oldest first century document regarding Christianity, and it's evidently clear Christians are worshiping Sunday that early within the apostles' own lifetime. Now, anyway, I do have to get out of here soon, but before I do, I think Chris wanted to say something, so I think I'll let him speak.
No, I was just my only point was just like in the private chat when people say that the Catholic Church is trying to be separate from the state, and it's like you can't say that. As soon as they made the Vatican, they want to combine both, and now you're a political entity, and you should be looked at a political entity and a religious entity, and there's hardly no separation. You done marry the two. You should have just stayed a church. Should have just left your statehood out of it. And as soon as you do that, people need to start looking at you like any other country, because if Putin. If I became like a Putinite, and Putin started having his own church, and he started be calling Pope, and I started calling Putin Holy Father, people would go nuts if I started running for office in America.
I would too.
Yeah, now
that's my only point to that.
Right. The issue there is that how should I say this? Secularism is best understood where both the state and the church are running parallel with each other to pursue a common good, where essentially they're both negotiating with each other for the benefit of the nation. That's how secularism ought to work. That's how it ought to function. The secularism we have today, where you owe allegiance only to your political leaders, is, as CJ had previously illustrated, is basically an American invention. And I would consider that an error, because what essentially it asks from you is that you cast aside moral scruples and simply follow orders. And that's not something anybody ought to do. They ought to be loyal to a moral guidance first and foremost, and then they can listen to their political leaders in charge in continuity with such moral rulings. That's precisely why it is not. That's why it's not contrary that Catholics can be Americans as well as Catholic, because as much as I want to follow this country and be allegiant to it, I'm not going to be allegiant to America when America is clearly in the moral wrong. If you do not have a moral guidance which you first submit to, then you will simply follow any order given to you by someone in authority that you recognize as American, and that is an issue. It's not something I'm comfortable with. I don't think anyone should be. So, with that being said, I think that would be my last statement that'll be my last statement there. I'm going to get on out of here. Love you, CJ, and everybody else in the panel and in the chat room. I'm going to do some of my schoolwork.
Bro, nice meeting you. Good to see you, brother.
Yeah, very brave, man. I mean, I'd be kind of, I'd be a little uncomfortable coming into a chat, man. So you must be. I mean, I don't know. I always appreciate listening to you when you come into these chats. By the way.
And I don't think you're coming in like, "Hey, it's my way." It's more like we're coming to you, and you just happen to be in chat, so don't be offended. Yeah, no, I think you're totally cool. Come on by anytime.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Fro's good people.
All right.
And
Love
yeah,
y'all.
we
But
should.
go ahead, CJ.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was
I
just
just
about
gonna
ready
say
to
we should.
leave.
Yeah. Well, and so here we should, because this conversation did end up being really good. Would you be interested, by chance, in setting up a conversation here this week on some? Because we've been trying to get Catholic Reformed issues talked for like a year now. We never actually have, other than these open rooms.
Sure. When do you need me on?
Let's see. What about Monday? This Monday. Does that work?
This Monday. What time?
Tomorrow.
Let's go with 12 p.m. Mountain Time. Be 2
How
p.m.
much?
Eastern. Does that work?
That would be 2 p.m. Eastern. Okay, I think I can make that work.
For sure. If it doesn't, definitely just let me know in the comment section or live chat, depending on whether or not this video is still going. Obviously.
Here,
But yeah.
let me do something real quick. I'm gonna put my email in the private chat so we can so you can get in touch.
Absolutely.
Hey, Fro.
Yo.
All right. Now, next time we meet, okay. So don't even try answering now. But convince me, you're not when you take the Holy Eucharist, when you go up there, when you walk up there and take the Holy Communion from the Father or the second in command, and convince me, you are not cannibalizing a 2,000-year-old corpse.
Mike, it is too late in the night for me to address this. I'll do that later, okay?
Well, those were my first words. Yes, later. So we both agree. Yeah, later. No, later. Next time we meet, just keep it in the back of your head.
Okay, because that's not the first time this accusation was leveled against me and the church more broadly. But yeah, I will address that when I come on later. Anyway, CJ, here's my email. It's right there. And if do contact me so we can keep in touch on to coordinate whether or not I can make it Monday, or if a date changes, something comes up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So just shoot me an email so we can keep in touch. And with that, I love you all bunches. Bye bye.
Shalom.
Have a good night, man. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not the first time me and Fro have talked, but I've always really enjoyed my conversations with Fro.
Yeah, I like hearing pushback from different perspectives. I think it really helps progress the conversation.
Yeah, well, and one of the interesting things about well, first off, I appreciate that Fro is a traditionalist Catholic, because that's a big deal these days. It's something that I'm familiar with, being a fundamentalist Christian, right? And it's like the traditionalist Catholic and the fundamentalist Christian for each of our respective camps are kind of on the same side. In other words, we're the conservative end of our camps. So that's always been something I appreciate, just because I really prefer those more fundamental types, right? But then also, I actually have I have a love-hate relationship with Rome, because on one end, I am firmly convinced that the Roman Catholic Church is the seed of the Antichrist. I believe it's a false gospel, all that other kind of stuff. And of course, being a traditionalist Catholic, Fro is, and one of the things I even appreciate about him is he said the same thing to me also, as far as like, look, the Protestant gospels are false gospels. And I appreciate that, because to be honest with you, if that's what your church teaches, tell me, let's have a conversation. So that's always been something I really enjoyed as well. But nonetheless, so I have that view, right? But then at the same time, there are things I greatly appreciate about the Catholic Church. For example, the respect that they have for tradition. Sometimes I think it gets a little bit too respectful, right? In other words, there are certain traditions that are probably, I would say, not biblical, and that we did the huge conversations about that, like Mariology and stuff like that. But like when it comes to like the holidays, or having a proper reverence for like the church fathers, or thinking of people like Patrick or Valentine, all these other kind of figures. I've always kind of appreciated that a lot as well. So it's like it's this sort of love-hate thing where it's like I really do appreciate the level of respect they have on tradition and on our history as believers. And yet at the other end, I of course have severe disagreement with a lot of the stuff that they would actually teach. Which is one of the big reasons why I really do like the whole Reformed thing, is because the Reformers tend to, for the most part, have that shared view of tradition. I also really like the fact that Reformed is not a denomination, because I'm sort of anti-denominational. But nonetheless, the whole point of all that was to say, it always makes conversations with Catholics, I think, very fruitful. Because too often the conversation really boils down to something like, mudslinging or something like that. But when you have people who are coming from a very, similar perspective on one end, but also a completely different perspective on another, I think it creates good conversation. One thing that actually was interesting, me and Fro ended up being on the same team a couple of times in these live chats, because of a shared sort of sense of protection over the holidays. Obviously, I know none of your business is probably a little bit frustrating to you. I'm sorry if you guys can hear my dogs in the background. But anyways,
Barely, you're doing fine.
There's really a bunch of different Christian holidays. There's like 50 or 60 if you start counting all the feast days. But a lot of them, for various reasons, I would not endorse. But there's 7 Christian feast days, which are called the universal feast days. And the reason they're called the universal feast days is because they are of such great antiquity. They're all pre-Nicene, right? So before the Nicene Council. In fact, they're all before Constantine was even born. And where that becomes important is it's before a bunch of the churches. Hey, stop it, guys. No, none of that. Sorry. The reason that becomes important is because they're holidays that existed before any of the churches split from each other, right? Which means that the Ethiopian Orthodox, the Oriental Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox, a lot of the Gnostic groups, the Catholics, they all still celebrate these holidays because they weren't defined by those terms yet, right? None of these divisions had happened. And as a result, they tend to exist also in a lot of the Protestant churches, especially churches that are Reformed, so Calvinistic, right? And those holidays are Epiphany, which is January 6th, Candlemas on February 2nd, Easter, which of course has a very complicated means of how you actually find it. It's actually not too complicated, but more complicated than I want to talk about right now. And then after that, you have 40 days after that, Ascension, 10 days after Ascension, Pentecost, Halloween, which always really, really shocks people. People think Halloween is definitely, if any holiday's pagan, it's that one, right? Well, it's not that one, right, actually. And then the last one, of course, is Christmas. And I have a particularly, how would I say this? I am very much against the anti-holiday crowd, the Scroogist crowd, if you will, who come against those 7 holidays because they typically don't actually know the history of it. They typically think these are Catholic or these are pagan or these were created by Constantine or something like that. I've had people tell me Halloween is based off of Dia de los Muertos, which is hilarious because it's the exact opposite, actually. Dia de los Muertos is based off of Halloween. But nonetheless, it's like that ended up being when I first started coming out on here, about that kind of stuff before I started doing my Hug Sameach series, which goes over the history of all these. Very often, the only other person in my camp, shockingly enough, was actually Fro, because Catholics have for quite some time recognized that these are Christian holidays. Now, of course, they have a bunch of other holidays that Christians wouldn't typically celebrate, like Lent, for example, or Mardi Gras. The different saint days, all those kinds of things. But at least with these 7, they're all actually of great antiquity and before any of these splits ever occurred. And they're also incredibly beautiful in their meaning, right? Like the Epiphany, for example, it celebrates many things, but one of the more important things is the inclusion of Gentiles in the fold. Candlemas celebrates the time when Jesus actually was cleansed at the temple. which is essentially his being accepted by God as a viable sacrifice, with the crucifixion and all that. Of course, Easter is his resurrection, ascension when he ascended to the right hand of the Father, Pentecost, the founding of the Christian church, as well as, of course, the event of Pentecost when the Holy Spirit had fallen from on high. Halloween is actually it's not really a celebration. It's more of a memorial day for martyrs, right? It's remembering the martyrs who have died for the faith over the years. And for Protestants, it has the added benefit of also being Reformation Day, which is, of course, the day that the 95 Theses were nailed to the Wittenberg door, basically the day the Reformation started, right? And then Christmas being the birth of Christ. And, I think all 7 of those things are very important, very awesome things to celebrate, to be honest with you. I don't see any reason why anybody would not want to celebrate them. And it's weird to me that people get so up in arms about this. And I've been rambling, but I'm going to stop here in a minute. People get so up in arms about this. They'll sit there and tell you, oh no, Easter is pagan. You're actually worshiping Ishtar. And it's like, that's not even close to true. You're so off in left field over here. And on top of being off in left field, all you're doing is making people's lives miserable. People want to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. Let them celebrate the resurrection of Christ. It's a celebratory thing. It's a thing that should be celebrated. And it's not like it has any relation to Ishtar anyways. They're not even the same word. But at any rate, the point is, I ended up very often being on the same side as Fro as a result of that. So a lot of experience with Fro. He's cool.
Yeah, and I think most people get all of their Christmas and Easter being pagan-oriented, pagan. I think that it all comes. They all come up with the same information. Oh, it's Ishtar, Ashtoreth. It's here, it's there. It's a pagan sun came out of the sky, into the Euphrates, came out of an egg and changed a bird, whatever. It all comes. You can get a what's the hourglass called, where it comes to a point. It all comes to a point at see if I'm saying this right, CJ. I think you agree. Hislop.
That is exactly right, Alexander Hislop.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Hislop, he spread a lot of false information about specifically Easter and Christmas.
I'm sorry. It's so hard for me to say. I'm going to try to say it again. I'm going to let you continue. Hislop, and now you say it. You say it, please. I'm listening.
Yeah, Hislop. That's exactly right.
Oh,
Hislop.
okay. Yeah.
His first name was Alexander, and Hislop himself was. And it always sucks to admit these kinds of things because it doesn't make your tradition look good, but that's fine because we trust men, not God, or the way around. That was a bad thing, right? Trust God, not men.
We understood.
Apologize, friends. Thank you. But nonetheless, Alexander Hislop was trying to take down the Catholic Church, and so he basically spread a bunch of anti-Catholic propaganda. The thing about that, though, is Hislop's damage was nothing close, I think, compared to what the atheists would do after the fact. Because whereas he meant it as an attack on the Catholic Church, they ended up meaning it as an attack on the belief that Jesus Christ is actually Son of God, that the entire Christian religion they wanted to take down, right? And so they would start saying nonsense like, the Bible's been translated 40 odd times, and all these kings have put in their own stuff, and Easter is really, derived from Ishtar, and the Osiris is the original Jesus story, and all this other kind of stuff, right? It all comes from the same group of people, even though it didn't always originate from the same group of people. As far as it's siphoning through the hose and getting out to our modern day, these are the people it ends up coming from, these zeitgeist characters, right? And it's all because it makes Christianity look bogus, right? I know you obviously disagree with me, but I've been convinced that Jesus's birthday is December 25th. Well, even if I'm wrong, one thing I hope everybody understands is the reason people attacked December 25th in the first place is because they wanted to attack Christianity. It had nothing to do with the date. And that doesn't mean the date's right. That's just an impugning of the motives of those people who have come against it. But the reason that a lot of people did come against it was simply oh, well, we want to make sure that the Christian religion is discredited. See, this holiday is actually pagan. You silly Christians, you know what I mean? And I think that's incredibly problematic. I had a conversation on here once with Alec Cox, and we were talking about Easter. And with absolute respect to Alec, my surname sharer, it's amazing how little the amount of research people will actually do into this actually is. The earliest sources we have coming from the 1800s. Ishtar worship ceased in the 300s BC. You know, I mean, we're talking a whole 2,100 years later. But, you know, hopefully I'll be doing stuff to help with that. I'm actually wanting to be done with a book by December. We'll see if it ends up happening. I kind of doubt it at this point, but my first published work will be on the question of whether or not Jesus was born on December 25th. I think he was. I think it also was I think the day he was born was also the first day of Hanukkah. And you know, one of the things that's cool about that is that would mean the last day of Hanukkah would be the day he was circumcised, but that's obviously, you know, just a question of whether or not that's true. But yeah, you know, it's problematic, and it sucks that people don't see the blatant attack on Christianity that comes from the attack on these holidays.
Do you in your book, or I don't know, right now briefly, I don't want you to go on and on about it, but no, with the part of the anybody trying to trace Jesus's birth looks at John being 6 months earlier. Do you and the course of Avaya that his father Zechariah did? Do you incorporate that somehow in your findings?
I do, yeah. So I'll be brief with it because I give the whole layout, of course, there, and maybe who knows, maybe you'll even be interested and want to read it. But so there's a couple different ways that you can discover when Zechariah's time at the temple would be, and you actually are stuck with two general time frames, right? Because they end up kind of going on a cycle. There's only I believe 24 different priestly castes, and so with your 48 weeks plus your holiday weeks, because in the holiday festivals where everybody would go to Jerusalem, all the priests would work, right? So you have each priestly group getting 2 different weeks in the year, and then all priestly groups also would work on these holidays. Not all the holidays, specifically the pilgrimage festivals, which are Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So, for example, you could have an individual working on an individual group working on Yom Kippur, but all groups are going to be working on Sukkot. Same thing with Hanukkah; all groups are going to be working on Shavuot, though, right? So that you have that there. So the Bible specifies it's a time not of holiday or not of a pilgrimage holiday, excuse me, but specifically a time when the priesthood of Abiah was there. So that narrows you down to 2 general points in the year. I say general because the Hebrew calendar is different from ours, right? And so it can be either starting in March or in April, and that'll obviously be changing where exactly you're born. So it's the 8th week and the 32nd week that you can have the priesthood of Abiah in the year, which if you start doing the math, that makes puts you, I believe it is, let's see, what was the first date? It's September. So that would put you at the May-June area. And then the second one, which is your December, is going to put you at the September and October area. I really could just pull up my notes here and tell you guys that instead of trying to remember it off the top of my head, but nonetheless. So those are your 2 areas where you can have John the Baptist being born, right? Or being conceived, excuse me. And then 9 months from there, because it says that within the 6th month he was conceived, 9 months from there, you can have a general date for when Jesus is born. Now, obviously, that does have to take the assumption that John was born relatively close to the moment his father goes home. But one of the things that makes it a little bit more likely that you can do this is that he's not actually at 6 months, but within the 6th month. So that does make it a little bit easier when you're doing all these deductions, right? Nonetheless, you eventually come to two general dates that you can use for Jesus's birthday, provided that that timeline is accurate, which I think it can be shown to be. But those time frames end up being December, January, which is the time frame I would be in, right, being December 25th, or the September, August area, which is the time frame a lot of people who say he was born on the Feast of Tabernacles want to be in, which ironically makes it to where we can't actually use that that line of argumentation to distinguish between those two, but we can use it to distinguish between groups like the spring camp and either of these two camps, right? So the spring camp is all the way back to the early church fathers. They would say like April and May. April and May is non-tenable considering what the Bible
March
has to say about these priesthoods.
I think March 3rd was what I last saw in chat as a possibility. We've always known about what you just said, but I just want to throw in additionally, somebody went as far back as March 3rd. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's one of the lines of evidence. I do have a couple.
Oh yeah, so
you know,
no,
like
so you were saying, so yeah, it kills the spring people's camp. Yes, that are in that camp. So the two possibilities are Sukkot and Hanukkah. Essentially, and real quick, do you kind of unrelated, but some people might want to try to use it as the chronology, the children, not the children, the Magi bringing the child the three gifts that had not, it couldn't have been at his birth. Number one, you would have to agree. Do you see that as helping you find it? It was like 18 months later or something, we believe. Do you see that in helping you find the chronology for Jesus's birth?
No, and the reason why is because of exactly what you just said, how it's not at his birth. Whenever the Magi showed up, it appears he was at least a year old. So it's not actually helpful. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, it doesn't end up being particularly helpful for finding the date. Now, it can be helpful, maybe, soft maybe, on the year. The reason I say soft maybe is because general consensus has been that if he was anywhere from 1 to 2 years old when Herod tried to kill him, then that would mean he would have to be born a minimum of 2 years before Herod died. And so in that way, it can be helpful. But as far as his actual birthday, I don't think it helps at all, especially considering the traditional date of the Magi's actually showing up is January 6th. And that's almost certainly not true.
And
it's almost guaranteed to not be true.
Yeah,
so
I learned that
creates a little bit of a problem also.
I learned that through our Hispanic community. They have a I forget what they call it, a day of it is about January 12th, maybe January 6th, where they have they think that the gifts were actually brought, and so that's when they celebrate their Christmas. It was really weird to see in my Hispanic community the people doing that, and but they actually have a little thing that you can buy at Walmart, like a giant piece of bread, and it's got a little plastic Jesus that you shove in the bread, and then the kids got to eat the bread and find that plastic Jesus. I'm thinking they're going to choke on the thing. What the heck kind of holiday is this? But I think it might be called not Casa de Reyes. Yeah, you're familiar with it? Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. But yeah, and in English we call it Epiphany. I actually have a video on Epiphany if you're ever interested in it. So Epiphany is actually how we know that the Magi probably didn't show up then. So Epiphany claims to be a celebration of when the Magi had showed up. But it claims to be a couple different things. Its main reason for being celebrated was that it was celebrating Gentile inclusion into a before strictly Jewish religion, right? But the reason January 6th was chosen was said by some to be because it was the date of his baptism, Jesus's baptism. It was said by others to be the day that the Magi showed up, and it was said by others still to be the day of the wedding at Cana, where he turned the water into wine. Ironically enough, what's more likely is that it was originally floated as a date of Jesus's birth. That's at least the conclusion I've come to. Because when you get into each of the camps, right, the spring camp and the winter camp, they actually have two popular dates within the camp. So you break apart again, right? In the spring camp, they tended to say either April 20th or May 20th. And in the winter camp, they tended to say December 25th or January 6th. And eventually, December 25th wins out, but January 6th was still celebrated. And the way it ended up being celebrated is in the form of the Epiphany. And that all happens way early on, like 2nd century. But it's a very interesting development. And that's how I think we came to celebrate Epiphany. But Epiphany's original meaning was not to commemorate the event per se, as much as it was to commemorate the idea of Gentiles being included into the fold.
Yeah, see, I guess I guess I go by the September date for Jesus's birth, 4 BC in September. I don't know like the exact day. I haven't like researched enough to know an exact day. I just know it has to be fall of 4 BC, just based on the Daniel 9:24 through 9:27, the 70 weeks, the 490 years, and where the 3.5 years has to basically, if he's starts his ministry at the age of 30, and then in 3.5 years, so you go from 27 AD fall, he gets baptized, he gets crucified 31 AD. April-ish. So that's kind of where that's why that date, I favor that date more, just because it makes everything just land really nicely. And then that particular year, he would also well, I won't get into all that. That's just the main reason why I go with that date.
I think Jamie actually has it on September 11th of all things, 9/11 of like -3 or something.
I heard that, and I kind of like would like to see all that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it would be weird, but yeah, I mean, it might be true. But he's not the first person I've heard say that, so it's not too weird.
Oh,
yeah. Well, and the fall date camp, I would refer to them as the Heiser camp, because he is I don't know if he originated it, but he certainly made it popular. And the Star of Bethlehem movie also made it kind of popular as well. One thing I'm going to do in this book is I'm gonna start it off by laying out my reasons for believing that Jesus was born December 25th, and I'm going to go specifically December 25th of 5 BC. But then after that, I actually want to have a section addressing counter arguments to my argument, have a section addressing polemics against the spring date, and then have a section discussing polemics against the fall date. Obviously, all in good fun, in the sense that I think this is certainly an inside issue. Everybody's a believer in this case, right? But to be kind of thorough with it and to give people some fun reading and some good stuff to research, I want to make sure that I'm taking into account arguments against December 25th, as well as arguments for spring and fall dates. And honestly, it's going to end up being a relatively comprehensive work, at least hopefully. I want to actually get a hold of Doug Wilson up in Moscow and see if he'd publish it. I have no idea of whether or not he would. Never spoken to the man, but it's in the same state as I am, so I think it'd be worth a shot. You know what I mean?
Where are you at?
I'm in Idaho.
No, you're not.
Same state as Jamie, actually. We lose you there? No? Okay, good. I just saw you.
I had nothing to add, so.
Yeah, and we might actually, we're hitting the 3-hour mark, so it might be about time for us to go ahead and call it a night. This has been a very fun conversation. Anybody have any last words before we go ahead and get out of here?
Shout out to the chat, man. All them brothers and their sisters that come and go. Some troll, some not troll, some wallflowers, some strangers, sojourners, some friends, family, mods. Oh, Who can I think of? I don't even know. But I would recognize them if I saw their name. But yeah, just a big shout out to everybody in the chat. It's tough. Some people in the chat can't do the Zoom. Are we on Zoom or stream? Can't do the StreamYard thing. Other people are like me. They're analog people living in a digital world, and but no. And then there's people that can, and they're just like wallflowers or something. No, man, praises to them, brothers and sisters out there. The people that came in earlier, the poor guy Nick. We kind of I think we all wanted to hear from him, and and then Jamie and some other people. I think but no, it's good to hear all the varied views. But the poor guy that was that is Catholic, Fro. Just a quick shout out to him.
Yeah.
That I'm ex-Catholic. I don't know what paperwork I tore up to become ex-Catholic, but at some point I became. But my mom, my family, my friends. Oh my gosh, I have so many friends that are Catholic. It's ridiculous. We don't. Well, from a Hebrew roots point of view, they probably think they're going to hell or something. I don't know, but from my point of view, they have the love. Okay, like the Hebrew roots got like the knowledge. All of a sudden we got this truth. Oh my gosh, let's put this and this together. This is how beautiful it is. It magnifies Jesus. It magnifies the Father. It puts everything together in a collective. But at the same time, there are repercussions, like we see with Cynic's CJ's work, with the holidays being such an abomination now in our eyes. But no, in my eyes, and I think a lot of the Hebrew roots eyes, the Catholics, you good Christians, you have a love for God, Jesus, the Lord, but you don't know him, of course. So yes, I think with us over here on our superior, we now have this truth, this knowledge, and this and that, have lost that love. Like I say, my mom, Catholic, I think she's going to get in just fine because of her love, not because she thinks, because she's anti-Calvinist, or because she's actually in the synagogue of Satan, the Catholic Church. No, those that are being deceived, those that love God Almighty, Jesus Christ, those that love him, but are being deceived. They did not choose to seek out the truth, or they weren't given a curiosity or something. They will not be given any more truth if they don't seek out the truth. They will not. The current truth they were given will be taken away. So that's the freedom of the truth that we need. But it's fine. They have a love, so God gave them a provision, like you give a guy on a desert island provisions to get through. It's like, dude, you're in a bad spot. Here's the best I can do for you. You know what I mean? You're not seeking me out. You're not trying to find out, I'm the Passover lamb. What are these feasts in the Bible? What are you talking about? Oh, this Epiphany feast, we understand real clear. But can you tell me about the first of the first fruits? The what? Yeah, exactly. But no, since you have a love, you've been given a provision. This deception, this very strong deception by the Catholic Church, that the Catholic Church leaders, elders, popes will all pay for in a terrible, terrible ending. But the ones that they are deceiving, it's a strong delusion. It's a delusion of love, that Jesus is love. All you need is grace and love. And don't cuss at somebody when they take your parking spot. And if you help that, you give a pack of cigarettes to that guy on the street, you're going to go to heaven twice as much as the priest that taught you how to do that. Because your priest is going to be right there at the pearly gates with Peter, escorting you in, saying, come on. No, it doesn't work like that. You guys have such a love that most of us have lost. Yes, I respect you and love you, but no, I will battle against the hierarchy of your church till the death. I will battle that to the death.
Well, I don't want to. There's the ending there. I disagree with what you said, but I don't want to stretch this out. My main point is I just kind of want to circle back to the King James. I just hope you keep in mind, CJ, because it's I really liked your debate the first time with Nick. I think you did really well. I mean, Nick kind of surprised me, because if I was going to go debate a King James onlyist, I would have been caught off guard a little bit, and you weren't. So I think you did really well. The only thing I would say is, if someone gets you on that Easter argument, you already know how to tear up the Herod part of it. When they say that it was Herod issued it because it's a pagan holiday. So you know how to tear up that part of it. But when someone, switches to the other side where it says, oh, Easter's actually a good day, it's still now I understand Tyndall did it, but the way they define it in the King James Bible, because they go and define it, and they define it as being on every Sunday. Well, Passover is not every Sunday, so therefore when you apply that word that one time in there, that means every Sunday. They already defined it. They can't get out of it. So that's a bad translation because it's not every Sunday. And then you saw how he reacted when I brought up the Tophet, T-O, I think it's, I saw a couple of different spellings. T-O-P-E-T, though, that Hebrew word, it sounds like spit. It means to spit. And that's one, when these people say it's a perfect translation by God, just like they had their hands, God had his hands on, made a perfect translation. I think that because you saw how he looked like that was kind of like it took him back, so I mean, I would say those two key points, adding to everything you already do, it should make you just smash just everybody in a King James only debate. That's about my only little helps I would even say that you need. Yeah, otherwise you're probably on your way to being the best debater.
Well, I appreciate that a lot, man, and I know you've been actually plugging the channel a lot over at your place too, so I appreciate that a lot as well.
Yeah, I probably need to say. I mean, I
always-
look in my show notes. I probably should say it. I do have you listed as one of my recommendations, but I should be listening. And as soon as I get time to mess with my website, I do plan on putting you in CJ's channels, like as featured channels people should look at. So, but that's it. Yeah,
it's always something that I appreciate tremendously from you guys.
Yeah, your channel is
No, sorry,
actually
I was
helping.
just-
Like I found it through that debate with you and Nick. That's how I even found out about your channel. And I went and checked you out because I was like, wow, this guy sounds like he really knows his stuff. And I mean, that one debate really impressed me. So that's why I went and subscribed to you. And then I saw Jamie's channel popped up when I subscribed to you. So I subscribed to him. So I think the way you guys handle yourselves, have these open conversations, and actually, people, when I see these random people come on, like Mike and everybody come on, I'm like, and A's Philosophy, I'm like, this is a really nice community, and I just really enjoy that, how you really help believers flesh out their thoughts. It's like they may start out agreeing with one person and wind up agreeing with another just because you let them talk it out, or they might disagree with all of you, but because all of you are talking, I almost felt like it was like the Holy Spirit. I'm not even I'm not going to say, who's saved and who's not and all that other stuff, but I feel like the Holy Spirit still is working with everybody from their different backgrounds and having them talk and move. And I when I was like listening to your shows and I think it really helps me figure out things. So I'm really appreciative of it.
Well, thank you very much for that, man. It is very cool to hear, and I always appreciate any sort of criticism, good or bad, because that lets me know what I'm doing right and also what I need to improve. And in the end, this is all for, as much as I love philosophy and theology and history and apologetics and all this other kinds of stuff, in the end, if I'm not edifying the body and glorifying the Lord, then there's nothing to it, right? So very appreciative of you, telling me there is some edification there and you feel this is Christ glorifying, and appreciate actually being able to talk to you for the first time too. We've talked in the live chats plenty of times, but this is the first time we've actually been in the same room, so that was nice also.
Oh yeah, likewise.
Absolutely. So with that, friends, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Appreciate everybody who showed up. If you did, please remember to like and share this video, as well as subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Looks like the same link was just posted twice in the live chat. One of those was supposed to be a PayPal link, so I apologize for that, friends. If anybody here wants to support what we do, first off, I ask that you do so with trepidation, only if you think that this is good apologetics content that is indeed edifying. there is a glut of bad content, right? Because everybody and their mother has a microphone, so everybody and their mother has an opinion to share. So I don't want to be everybody and their mother. I would like to be an apologist who's actually helping you guys. If that is the case, though, if you do agree with that, please do consider contributing either one time to the PayPal or full time to the Patreon. Also, another way you can support us, other than liking and sharing and subscribing and commenting and doing any of that stuff and all the other stuff we mentioned, is you can follow us on social media. I'm on Gab, I'm on Parler, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Minds. If any of you guys want to get actually in contact with me, that's the best way to actually go ahead and do that as well. So anybody who has been here, I appreciate you guys tremendously. Don't think we'll be here tomorrow, but nonetheless, tomorrow is Sunday. So for those of you who go to church on Sunday, go to church, read your Bible, do what it says, trust God, keep his commandments, and if the Lord wills and tarries, we'll be seeing you here soon.